Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss every year of film history in order, starting in 1895, the dawn of cinema. And this episode is 1943. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me as always is.
I'm Glenn Covell. I'm a filmmaker.
And joining us for the first time, we've got.
I am Ambriehl Turrentine. I'm a film programmer, which means I just get paid to watch movies. So yeah, huge movie fan.
Good gig.
Very good gig. Yeah.
I'm glad to have you on, Ambrielle. I've been wanting to for a while, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Hopefully things go well and I can make a return. But if not, thanks for having me this one time. I appreciate it.
I'm sure they will. And so we had you on in order. There was a specific movie that you had been wanting to talk about, and so
Yes,
we brought you on for this one. I've had you on the list for a long time, so you're welcome to pick another one coming up soon.
I have some ideas, so I'll send those later.
Nice. All right. Well, yeah. How's everybody doing? What's going on in your lives? We'll catch up.
I mean, not a lot. Oh, I am gonna hopefully be visiting Los Angeles next week to work on a friend's movie. So that's fun.
A friend's movie. I mean, can we say former guests
Oh, true.
movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Once and future guest of the show, Nats Can Fly, is directing a thing. And so I'm
Nice.
I'm getting flown out there to help out, which is exciting.
Sweet. Wow, this we operate like in three completely different realms of film. I'm realizing it's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Ambrielle, how are things with you?
Life is good. I mean, average. My cat is getting over a UTI, so I just like gave her medicine, so I think she'll be quiet during this podcast, but if you hear her meowing, that's her. But yeah, other than that, virtual Sundance just ended, so I watched a whole bunch of Sundance films,
Oh,
and
nice.
they were pretty solid this year, actually. Yeah, this was a good year. And other than that, just living my life, watching movies, doing the best I can.
Nice.
Any standouts? Anything we should keep our eyes peeled for?
Oh, our new segment, Ambrielle's Sundance Selects.
Okay, so I saw upward of 20 films. I lost track after 20. But I know so Train Dreams is a big one. Netflix bought it. I don't know when it'll be out, but that's a really good one. It's a narrative starring Joel Edgerton and Felicity Jones. Another narrative I liked was Sorry Baby. It's A24, produced by Barry Jenkins. My friend also had an executive producer credit, so that was cool to see on my screen. Shout out to Catalina if you ever hear this. Love you, girl. Um, so that was a great one. That got picked up by A24 if I didn't say that. I'm a huge documentary person, so there was a great documentary about the show To Catch a Predator, and like kind of
Oh, wow.
analyzing the ethics of it all, and how it's influenced like modern day gotcha television in a way.
Mm.
Um, there was a documentary called The Perfect Neighbor, which very sad. So I'll let people like Google what that's about. But it's a documentary that's created 100% from police body camera and like investigation videos
Whoa.
and stuff. And it really flows seamlessly. It's really remarkably edited. Um, but yeah, those are the ones that I'm thinking about. I probably have more favorites that I could keep going on and on, but those are a few. So
Nice.
Cool.
I look forward to seeing those when they come out in a year, probably.
Yeah.
yes,
We
exactly.
got we got we got the inside scoop.
And I'm just I don't know, I'm just doing my thing in DC, settling in, all that kind of deal. Uh I the thing that I'm excited about lately is just yesterday. Um so at the National Gallery we have a media lab, which is kind of just like a really elaborate digitization room. And so they've got like these rack mounted tape players of every various type of professional and consumer tape devices and and all of this other kind of stuff to like run kind of analog film and get it digitized and all that analog things in various ways. The one I'm most excited about though is that they have this Blackmagic Cintel film scanner. It's like a $30,000 35 millimeter and 16 millimeter film scanner. Shoots it in shoots every frame in HDR, 4K, and then yeah, it's incredible. I'm so excited to start playing around with it. And if you're my friend and you have film that you want scanned, I will scan it for you.
Does it? I mean, I do have reversal film that I do want to get rescanned 16 millimeter. I also have 16 millimeter colored negative. Like I have negatives that I would at some point maybe like to rescan. I'm actually less sure about those because that's like
It's got a setting for
project.
negatives, so you're set.
But the black and white reversal stuff, I do like genuinely very much want to rescan at some point. So maybe I'll make a trip down there.
Nice. All right. Well, good to talk to y'all. Happy to have you here, Ambriehl. Before we get started with our goings on in the film world of 1943, first we like to give ourselves a little context for what is going on in the world, as if people don't know what's going on in the world in 1943. So, Glenn, why don't you take it away with the news?
The news of the year, 1943. Casablanca. Allied forces clandestinely meet at the Anfa Hotel to plan the next stages of the European theater. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising strikes back against the Nazis, the largest effort of Jewish resistance of the war. As the Axis powers begin to lose ground, Joseph Goebbels declares total war on the Allies, letting down their smokescreen of power. Chemist Albert Hoffman first ingests his synthesized drug LSD. As he rides his bicycle home from work, things get pretty crazy, man. We can do it! Women of the U.S. workforce in the U.S. supporting the war effort receive a mascot in Rosie the Riveter. Il Duce is ousted. The Grand Council of Fascism replaces Mussolini as the Italian Prime Minister. The Allies invade and take Italy. The new Italian government joins the fight against the Nazis. Chiang Kai-shek becomes the leader of Taiwan. He meets Roosevelt in Cairo to strategize the Pacific Theater. Olivia de Havilland and the Screen Actors Guild sue Warner Brothers to end the practice of indefinitely extending performers' contracts, granting actors much more freedom from the studios.
And that is, I guess, some of the better news of the year.
Yeah,
real whiplash compared to 1942 news.
I mean, there was a lot of horrible stuff that I did not put in this.
Yeah.
I tried to focus on the nicer things that were happening in World War II.
I tried with the 1942 news, and there was there's nothing good happened in that year.
All right, well, let's get started. We have a few shorts. Ambriehl will join us for one of them. Well, I guess we'll probably put that last. And let's get started with 1 week, 1 reel. We have a couple World War II things.
Yeah, I feel like we should start with Private Snafu.
Yes, for situation normal, all, say it with me, fouled up.
Well, see,
you didn't say it with me.
I didn't say it with you because I take umbrage. I don't like censorship. Even in the first short, though, it takes a long pause at the F acronym part, and it's situation normal, all fouled up. It really emphasizes that, which I thought was very funny.
Yeah, I mean, these are cartoons that are made by the Looney Tunes crew, more or less, but also made under kind of highly secretive conditions. They were not intended to be seen outside of the military, and some of the people working on them had very restricted information about them. Not that there's anything really too sensitive in these. It's just that they are, because they're not for a wide distribution and they're for a military audience, they are a little more risque, shall we say.
I think they're a little saucier,
than
maybe they would be otherwise. But I mean,
they make flagrant use of the word "damn."
Sure, but I mean, I do think I think animation can kind of get away with a little bit more in the early 40s than live action. But yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that. If because these were not not for public consumption. They were only to be used like for the military if they were like allowed to be pushed a little bit further.
They were seemingly not subject to the production code.
Interesting. But yeah, they're very like propaganda. They're not really training films. They feel much more like propaganda films than like they're not. I mean, they're kind of training films ostensibly. They're like, hey, don't loose lip sink ships.
That's we did all of the 1943 Private Snafus. It's his debut year. They're each 4 minutes long, but like there's two of them that really the main deal of them is loose lips sink ships. Stop
That's
running
a hard
your mouth.
phrase to say.
Stop running your mouth, Private S. Yeah, so like they were, I guess, intended for like kind of entertainment for troops, and also in particular like kind of light, maybe not like training, but sort of like moral training for
quit your belly aching. Stop complaining.
Yeah. Don't complain about your pay or your bad conditions or wish that you were in a different branch of the military. Everything sucks. Deal with it. That's the main thing.
Like, I feel like this is like a pretty kind of standard thing of like, oh, they made cartoons to like entertain the troops and also like kind of teach them lessons, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think what makes these stand out is one, just kind of how silly they are, but also like the talent behind them is kind of mind blowing, because it like you said, it's like the Looney Tunes people is like Mel Blanc and who else?
Chuck Jones.
Bunch of those dudes, and then
Fritz
it
Freleng,
also Fritz Freleng, and then also some of them are written by Dr. Seuss, and then they were, I guess, initially created by
Frank Capra.
Frank Capra, yeah, thank you. So it's like the talent behind the pen on these is very strong.
Yeah, and they're fun. They're not incredible, but they're a fun time.
The one that I had seen before, which I think might kind of be the most famous one, is Spies, which I don't know if they still do, but I saw it sort of playing on a loop at the Spy Museum in DC. So that one I'd seen before. I think that's still my favorite one.
It's got a lot of panache. It's there's a part with a Nazi lady spy who has swastika broadcasters inside of her boobs, as in say goodbye to your Nazi boobs.
Like radio, like microphones.
Yes, and every Nazi thing has to have a swastika on it to show you that it's a Nazi
also
thing.
all of the U-boats when they come out of the water in a swastika formation, and then the periscopes all Heil salute. Yeah, they're really having a lot of fun with the iconography in these shorts. There's two moose head, like mounted moose heads that talk to each other, and then their antlers cross and form a swastika.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of really horrific racial stereotypes in this, particularly of the Japanese, which has not aged well. It wasn't good then. It's not good now.
Pretty par for the course for World War II era media, but of course depictions like that did not help in terms of changing people's thoughts when they were okay with things like the Japanese internment camps, for example.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
it's definitely a sign of that. Like I feel like there was definitely more of a racial bias towards the Japanese versus Europeans, which is unfortunate, but very American. Other than that part, which is like definitely sticks out in a few of them. I don't know, I think they're mostly just kind of silly goof 'em ups.
Yeah. Private Snafu is the whole kind of premise of it is that he is bad at what he does and he's lazy and what do they call him, a gold brick or something? It's that's not it. But it's a kind of don't do what Donnie don't does situation.
Right. He's sort of a goofus figure.
Right. So that everyone watching him can feel like a gallant.
Yeah, correct. You get all the GIs walk out of these going, boy oh boy, I'm a real gallant. Not like that Snafu fella.
I wonder if people really. I mean, apparently this was quite popular. Maybe they really took it to heart and they said, "Hey, you Private Snafu, get your act in gear," or whatever people say in the 40s.
It wouldn't surprise me. There's also a lot of the aforementioned sort of Nazi radio boobs. There's a lot of like pinup ladies in these. There's one of them starts with Snafu snoring, and his snores are like causing a skirt to fly up in the air.
Yeah, in like a picture on the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. All those servicemen, they're out there in their boot camps on boats. They're all very horny. We need to give them something.
And speaking of, I mean, we're about to cover this later, but there's almost like a reference to Red Hot Riding Hood in one of these. There is a guy when he's imagining Snafu's imagining his girlfriend back home. There is a guy who temporarily transforms into a wolf to hit on his girlfriend.
Oh, maybe I didn't watch all of them that I should have. I don't remember that
the
one.
big bad wolf he transforms into specifically.
I think I might have skipped that one. Whoops.
It's okay. They're 4 minutes long. You can watch it if you want to. But yeah, it's got some Mel Blanc stuff. He is basically doing the Bugs Bunny voice.
Yeah, it's like very clearly. Even if I didn't like know who that was, it's like, oh yeah, that's Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, as soon as you hear him scream too, like that's just the classic Mel Blanc scream.
Yeah, and it is. I feel like these feel very. They feel very of their time, both in funny ways and in also like uncomfortable ways. But they are like some of the most 1940s like pieces of culture that I have seen almost, like they feel so incredibly like exactly of their time. Like they probably were sort of dated like months after they were shown.
Except for one of these, which has it shows a newspaper that says Adolf Hitler commits suicide 18 months before he committed suicide.
Hey.
So that one.
Wow, they really called it.
Yeah.
How did they know? What did they know that we didn't? We who live in the 21st century.
Yeah, we know that Adolf Hitler committed suicide, so they didn't. Right. They didn't know. They did not. We know. Whatever.
Yeah. Still, that is pretty wild that they called it. They got it right.
Yeah. And the official 1 week, 1 year stance, we're glad he did.
Correct, yeah.
Well, there's another cartoon that we watched where a bunch of stuff turns into swastikas. And that is the Academy Award winning Der Fuhrer's Face.
A nice Donald Duck cartoon.
It's a Donald Duck cartoon. I feel like this was a pretty deep cut until I feel like it's become more well known lately. But like it does feel like this kind of forbidden short in a way. Like you're not allowed to see a Disney mascot like do a Hitler salute and scream Heil Hitler,
Was this one of the ones that was like banned for a long time?
I don't know if it was like banned per se. I think it was more like they didn't really continue to distribute it. They didn't want. They're like,
it's not on Disney Plus.
It is not on Disney Plus, I believe. Yeah, they don't want little children stumbling upon it and then finding out that
it's okay. Donald Duck did it. Yeah, that was actually Elon Musk's excuse, as he was like, he saw Donald Duck do it, so he thought it was okay.
That's why he also leaps into his piles of money.
He's basing most of his behavior off cartoon ducks, and it is not working out well for him.
Soon he'll do the and just run away. Won't that be?
Ugh, if only.
Yeah, so this is a movie, short about from Disney in Technicolor. So it's got like some kind of similar theming to Snafu, as far as just being this anti-Hitlerian propaganda, but you can tell that it's got sort of higher production values.
Yeah.
The lush Disney animation is on display in this one, even while a lovingly animated Sieg Heiling Donald.
Although I wouldn't say the animation in the Snafu shorts is bad, but it is definitely a little bit simpler, a little bit cheaper looking. It's black and white.
It's more bare bones.
Yeah. It is pretty wild that this won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short. When it's like, it's just Donald Duck like doing a bunch of like Nazi stuff and getting yelled at. And then waking up and being like, oh, thank God I'm not a Nazi.
Yeah. I mean, if I had a dream like that, I would feel happy to not be a Nazi also.
Yeah. But I also then probably would not like hug an American flag like Donald Duck does, because I don't think that would make me feel any better.
Yeah, so this movie is a whole big dream sequence where Donald's imagining he's a Nazi, and then he wakes up, and as he wakes up, he's said Heil Hitler so many times in this short, and then as he wakes up, he sees a shadow on the wall that kind of looks like a Heiling silhouette, and he says, Heil Hitler! Oh, it's the Statue of Liberty.
I'm so glad to be an American.
I can't do it very well.
I definitely didn't do it well either. But you actually got to say words, though.
That's the hurdle I've yet to get over.
And yeah, a lot of it's just kind of critiquing the experience of living in Nazi Germany, I guess, saying like everything's, we should be glad to be Americans because they are having to struggle off of stale bread that you have to saw like a piece of wood, or and they're being overworked to make shells, have knives pointed at them, and it's basically like a modern times riff. When Donald Duck is making shells
that's
on the
true.
assembly
It
line.
is just modern times.
It is just modern, including like the joke of like the thing stops on the assembly line and he keeps doing the repetitive motion in the air.
Wow, Disney, just lifting jokes from Chaplin movies. Now I see. That makes me a little bit more annoyed that it won the Oscar. How unoriginal of them.
Flagrant copying. You copied.
I mean, it's a good joke, so I guess it's okay.
Yeah, the real evolution of that joke isn't until I Love Lucy, probably.
Is there a riff on the assembly line in that too?
You don't know? You don't know this?
I don't. I'm not savvy on my I Love Lucy stuff.
It is like the most legendarily classic I Love Lucy clip that it's kind of hard for me to believe that you haven't seen. Which
I probably have.
Everywhere.
Is the thing. I just don't remember.
Where like she and her friend are on this assembly line. I don't know. They're doing something related to. There's like candy on the assembly line, chocolate, I think, and like they're trying to. I forget what the action they're trying to do is, but the chocolate's coming along the assembly line, and they're trying to like wrap it up into wrappers or something, but it's coming too fast. And so they start stuffing it into their mouths to get rid of it.
I think I have seen this, yeah.
I'm just like describing a famous scene from I Love Lucy now. This is great podcasting. But
I mean, isn't most of our show just describing famous scenes? But yeah, Fuehrer's face is... I somewhat appreciate how like mean it is, of just like, those rascally Nazis, we don't like them. And I'm like, yes, I agree.
Yeah. And it comes with a novelty song, too, which was kind of became somewhat popular after this thing. There's right in der Fuhrer's face, they say.
Yeah. I did not much care for the song. It was kind of stuck in my head for a little while.
I think the messaging on the song's a little muddy, considering that it's saying like we heil, right? You don't want to be doing that.
No. We do not, under any circumstances, want to do that.
Well, that was Der Führer's face, and
It was indeed.
I do wonder if we should have put the cartoons all together, but we're gonna take a cartoon break, and we'll talk about Meshes of the Afternoon.
Ah, indeed. Yeah. Not a cartoon, but also, like, I guess, surreal. I would actually say that this is probably more surreal than the cartoons are.
Oh yeah. This is not depicting it's not depicting any kind of reality that I'm familiar with. So this is kind of, yeah, surreal is the word. I'd say it kind of fits pretty squarely in that surrealist zone, a la Un
Yeah.
Chien Andalou and L'Âge d'Or.
Yeah, it definitely, if not directly inspired by that film or like other Louis Buñuel or Salvador Dali stuff, it feels sort of a piece with that. I think it feels like it's kind of using film to make a similar kind of art as those guys were doing.
Yeah, I don't know what the situation with this movie is. I had never really heard of it before, but it is
Same.
kind of weirdly broadly known. I think like it's on Letterboxd. It has like over 100,000 watches, which is pretty rare for stuff this old.
Yeah, it's like it's the most popular film on Letterboxd for 1943, which is
Yeah.
surprising. I mean, on one hand, it's also like 43 doesn't really have a lot of like huge kind of seminal
But
foundational
keep listening,
movies.
folks.
I mean, I'm not saying that the movies are bad. I'm just saying I feel like none of them are like this like tower. None of them are like Casablanca or
Yeah.
whatever. No other examples that I can think of.
Yeah, this one I something about it, I kind of wonder if like maybe it's like a film school staple or something, and that's
It
why
probably is, which is kind of weird because I went through 4 years of film school, never
you
saw it. I don't
you went
think I
through
even
hella
ever
film
heard of it.
school.
Yeah, so much film school. I did watch Un Chien Andalou in film school more than once, but yeah, never this one.
But yeah, this movie is oh my gosh.
It's directed by a
duo.
sort of a married couple, Maya Deren and Alexander Hackenschmied. If I completely butchered that name, I apologize to anyone with a similar sounding name. I clearly did not look this up ahead of time.
Although like later in his life he went by Alexander Hamid. So that might be a little easier.
All right. We'll use the anglicized name going forward then.
But yeah, this is a movie that it's got like it's a bunch of imagery. It is originally intended to be 100% silent. No accompaniment, I believe, was designed
which
to
is
go with this movie.
How I watched it.
Me too. And I was like, whoa, blast from the past here. Like I'm having to like really concentrate.
Yeah. Which I kind of like about that it does, at least in the context of how we watched it, it like really locks you in.
Yeah, I watched a bit. I watched a bit of it again later, and I watched a version that had a score, and I almost found the score a little bit too didactic, a little bit too much like it was imposing a certain meaning on it.
Right.
And yeah, I think this is like mysterious enough that it kind of does work really well without a score.
Yeah, there is definitely something to just presenting the imagery without any sort of sound or music to really kind of give you let it land however it's going to land with you. Which I think is really the intention of this movie. I think it is narrative vaguely, but I think it's much more about sort of like here is
maybe
a
you
bunch
can tell me what happened then.
there is I don't know. There's a person with a mirror for a face, which I thought
so cool
would make a great slasher villain.
Yeah,
like if there was a slasher movie about mirror face, I think it'd be pretty good.
And if you defeat that villain, then you get 7 years of bad luck.
True. So it's hard to get away from mirror face because if you kill mirror face, you get 7 years bad luck. But yeah, as far as I know, the small amount of reading I did on it, I think this was just like shot in Los Angeles, like at their house. It's only Maya and Alexander appear in the movie. Presumably one of them is playing Mirror Face also. It's got a real kind of like I don't know, like cyclical like repetition thing where like
Yeah.
something will happen to, I guess, the lead character played by Maya Deren, and then she will sort of observe that happening from afar also. So it's, it's got this sort of like, to put it in like, I don't know, sci-fi terms, it's got kind of a, I don't know, time loop sort of thing going on.
Yeah, although I don't think it's like that specific. Yeah.
Right, yeah. It reminded me a lot of, I mean, just David Lynch in general, but
Yeah.
Mulholland Drive in particular, one because of the like Los Angeles-ness of it, and also the repeated use of like keys. Like keys are a big thing in Mulholland Drive also. And just the general sort of like spooky vibes, I guess.
Yeah, it's spooky vibes. It is like, the one that I heard with the score, it was in like a score that was like, this is scary and disturbing, and it's like, I feel like the imagery does well enough of a job of giving you
Mm.
this kind of on edge feeling. It feels like a nightmare basically. And
Yeah.
I think like it there are ways that you could see this as like, following in the footsteps of an Un Chien Andalou, but I feel like this almost is like the mold that people have shot dreams in since, right? Like it's doing its own thing, but it feels like a dream sequence in a movie, but it's like
Hmm.
a long thing that is a bit disturbing and has a bunch of like really kind of like loaded imagery in it,
Yeah.
I think you can take other meanings out of, versus like, you know a dream in a movie where someone's dreaming about the specific thing that they are thinking about in order to, and you show the dream in order to show their inner turmoil about that thing,
Hmm. Yeah, but I mean, much like how dreams often are, it's sort of like all this stuff, and you're kind of left at the end of it being like, "What? I'm not sure if I understood all of that, but it got me. Like it was
Yeah.
cool." Like I could definitely see someone describing this to me as a dream and being like, "Yeah, that sounds like a dream."
I walked into my house and my shadow picked up the key and I found a knife, but then the key came out of my mouth, and then
The
there
key
was
was also the knife, kind of.
and then there was a nun with a mirror face, but I was kind of her, and then there was
Right.
another of me too, and I was sort of falling sideways through the stairs.
There's also a lot of slow motion in this, a lot of overcranked camera,
Hmm.
which I still like from kind of the beginning of filmmaking has been a thing, but I still feel like, especially in this kind of context, I haven't seen used quite as much. There's actually another movie we'll talk about in a minute, one of the features that also uses slow motion in a way that I kind of think of as a more modern, not invention, but just like the use of slow motion in this felt distinct for the time in which it was made, I guess.
It's selling it as a sort of internal experiential effect. Like,
Hmm.
how does watching this slow motion footage make you feel? It's not depicting, I don't know, it's not depicting like sometimes slow motion is like representing your experience of time slowing down when
Hmm.
you experience something, but I think this is even something else. It's just like, um it's just doing it to give you a feeling. And you mentioned Lynch, and since he died, so many people have been talking about like the things that he does, and about how, you know his movies maybe aren't supposed to be like understood or gotten. They're supposed to be like felt, basically. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that is what's going on here.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I'm curious, like what I don't feel like I have like a strong like take on what this film's imagery is supposed to represent necessarily. I mean, some of it is kind of I guess a little obvious of like knives are scary.
Yeah,
Um,
the flower is like is
right.
one
Oh
certainly.
yeah, that one's sort of obvious also.
Hat tip to Georgia O'Keeffe.
Yeah. But like I don't know, cool movie. I
Yeah,
dug it.
it's a vibe. I think it goes on the list of silent movies to put on in the background of a party.
Yes. Ooh, yes. It should definitely get added to that list. The other thing it did kind of remind me of is one thing I did in film school is like they might not even do this anymore, but like one of the early things, like they just give you a 16 millimeter camera and a roll of film and are like, go shoot something. And I feel like a lot of people who who are presented with that often make something like this.
Hmm.
They're just like a bunch of surreal imagery. It's shot on black and white film. It's short. It's like it's kind of just like I don't know. We're playing around. Everyone shoots something in slow motion just to see how it looks because it's like, hey, you can do that with this. Great, let's try it. That being said, if I saw this as a student film, I would be like, this person it gets a good grade. Like I'd be very impressed. But it does have a little bit of that kind of rough around the edges. Like, yeah, I mean, it's two people making a movie in their house.
It's my understanding that there were parts of this that were sort of made up on the fly too.
Yeah, but I don't I also find that kind of charming about it that it's like clearly made by just two people and there's like not a lot of greater I don't know like production to it.
Yeah, indie film didn't
Feels
start in the 70s.
it feels very handmade if that makes any sense. Because I feel like when talking about filmmaking, handmade is like, well, how's like you're still just using a camera, but
Now I'm trying to think of like what handmade film would be. Uh, Probably
it's
like
stuff you develop in your own bathtub. I don't know.
or rather than shooting it with a camera, you kind of like just kind of smear your hands on the emulsion of the film, and then that's what it is.
I mean, there was that animation that we watched that was all like charcoal, like shifting, like
Yeah,
charcoal drawings and stuff.
yeah.
I guess that's kind of handmade. Oh,
Wallace and
that's just
Gromit.
animation, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's a cool movie. It's hard to say much about it, like you were saying, but it is. You feel it. You
Yeah,
go, ooh,
yeah.
scary mirror person.
I think
Ooh,
it is. Yeah, it is a movie that I think
seaweed.
should be approached first on vibes more than anything else, and I think it succeeds at creating uh, interesting, cool, spooky vibes very well.
Yeah, I think there's probably a way that you could read stuff. I mean, there's definitely a way that you could like read stuff into the symbols and everything in it, but
Yeah.
I'm not smart enough for that.
It's funny like how much it all feels immediately like symbolic, right? It's like the key is clearly a symbol, the flower is clearly a symbol, the knife is clearly a symbol,
Yeah,
like the mirror face is clearly a symbol,
yeah. There's a lot of
all of the doorways, all of the staircases. Can you hear the massive
yes,
sort of traffic
yeah,
horns outside? Okay.
traffic horns. Yeah, I mean, like you're talking about, yeah, the symbols are clear because they hit them hard. They repeat them over and over and
Hmm.
over again, which is
Yeah.
part of I think like what makes them feel potent for sure. Um, I guess like one is like this kind of seeing and being seen, right? Like she is
Hmm.
like she is doing things and then perceiving herself and then perceiving herself, and then there's also like somebody with a mirror for a face,
Hmm.
like looking back, like she's looking back at herself kind of thing. I don't know exactly what it's doing with it, but it's some
Yeah.
consistency, I suppose.
Yeah. That's definitely I think at the core of I don't know what I assume is kind of the intent behind it.
It helps give it this kind of like paranoid feeling too.
Hmm. Right, a lot of looking over shoulders and
Yeah.
right, just like seeing yourself like disembodied is a kind of a spooky idea, right?
Hmm.
Like it's something that I guess outside of a mirror we never experience. Or watching a movie, I guess that's the only other time we perceive ourselves
Mm.
in the third person. So maybe there's something there too.
Uh,
Our
well,
movie's just a ghost with a mirror for a face.
Ghostface? Is this the first Ghostface?
Mirror Face is the original Ghost Face.
The 1 week, 1 year merch coming soon. We have a T-shirt that says "Mirror Face is the original Ghostface." All right, we're getting too far into this. Let's bring Ambriehl back in for Red Hot Riding Hood. How did everybody like this one?
Loved it.
Yeah, I mean, the best. I don't know if I'd ever seen it all the way through. I definitely seen clips of it for sure. But I might have watched it at some point. I can't really remember. But either way, it had been a long time, if so. And I don't know, it's so like it feels like a totemic cartoon almost. It's like so much
Yeah.
cartoon stuff is like not just in this, but feels like it like came from this, because I think a lot of it did, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, there's so many great gags in this that feel like all-timers of like
Mhm.
it's like too many to even say, but some classic cartoony ones being
I
like
did
the
write down some of the real doozies, but
some of the classic ones I think being like walking out of a door at the top of a building and falling that just opens to
Mhm.
nowhere and falling out, or walking uh opening a door and then and then hitting a brick wall and with a sign that says "Imagine that, no door."
that might have been the biggest laugh for me, just because I did not see it coming, and it's such a like dumb cartoon, like Looney Tunes joke. It's just great.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think I've ever laughed harder at like a single cartoon. And I also love the beginning of it, how it starts off with the traditional story and these characters like break the fourth wall and they're like, dude, we've done this 1,000 times before. Like, please come up with something else. It's so cute.
And I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
how then that leads into it to being like the most kind of like absurdly 1940s version of this.
All right, there's a wolf.
Yeah. Get this, there's a wolf, see? And he likes to whistle. Which I looked it up. The term wolf whistle does come from this cartoon.
Oh wow.
Wow. Okay.
I think the whistle itself, the was a thing that was already sort of like a thing that people did.
That's got to be a thing that people have just always done, I think.
Which according to Wikipedia anyway, came from sailors, and it's like mimicking a boat whistle that's like all hands on deck. And so that was sort of like, get a load of this, boys, all hands on deck. There's a pretty lady. But then yeah, the name for it stuck from this cartoon, which is definitely I don't know if that's necessarily something to be proud of, that this cartoon in like popularized wolf whistling. But it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, this thing is only like 7 minutes long and it's so full of stuff. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, very joke dense for sure. But
And
like gorgeously animated too.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's like really well put together.
Yeah, this is Tex Avery, who was working on at Warner Brothers, doing some Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies stuff until I think leaving for creative differences, and now at MGM doing some Tom and Jerry, and then also some of his original stuff like this one. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what to say about this, just because it's so simple, but it's kind of incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It is very funny, right? It's like it's almost hard to talk about because it's like so. I feel like even if a lot of people haven't seen it, like it's been so influential just on like on other cartoons and like
Mhm.
cartoon language almost, that it's just like, oh yeah, like of course, of course, there's a wolf with big eyeballs, like a boing.
Right. Yeah,
That one
the
clip is what I've seen just over and over. And then when I finally watched this short, I was like, oh, so that's where that's where that comes from. Because I've used that GIF with like so many friends, just thinking like, oh,
Right,
this is
yeah.
funny, googly eyes. But in context, it's even like 10 times more funnier. This is just an excellent short.
Because then there's some like variations of it too.
oh yeah,
Of like the wolf howl, the eyeballs, the like pounding on the table.
the pounding on the table is so good, and then he gets a machine that pounds on the table for him and whistles and claps at the same time,
And has like a big like whistle that toots.
I first saw this in an animation class that I took in college, and they reveal they were like, the eyes bugging out of his head is a metaphor for something. Do you get it? And I was like, oh my god, wow. This is my introduction to the idea of this metaphor.
Yeah, this film is absolutely, I mean, probably and this is why it's so funny, but it's probably the most aggressive yet still like comfortable representation of horniness that I've seen on film.
Mhm.
So
It is one of like the horniest things I've maybe ever seen. It's just
yeah,
like
and that's what's mind blowing about it is like it just keeps going. Like you have the wolf, but then you have the horny grandma, and you're like,
Yeah.
wait,
right.
why is this happening too?
Right, you get this kind of like extreme male horniness of the wolf, and then like it is kind of one-upped by this like manic female horniness of the grandma. um when I was looking at the Wikipedia article for this movie, it said Red's grandma is an oversexed man chaser, and then it had a blue,
One of those man
it was a
chasers.
blue link on oversexed man chaser, and it linked to the
Oh,
article for cougar.
beautiful.
I mean, yeah, accurate.
Also, I think like all-timer kind of deconstructionist gag in this is when he says, hey, follow that cab, and then the cab that he tells
Yeah.
to just goes off and follows it without him. Incredible.
Which then the wolf runs so fast that he turns into a car.
So much like great cartoon logic in this.
Yeah. I like one thing that definitely stuck out to me is like some of the very like direct influences it's had. Like Roger Rabbit takes
Mhm.
like fully lifts like jokes from this. I mean, like Red Riding Hood's kind of torch singer outfit is definitely, I think, a big influence on Jessica Rabbit's character design. And then the horny grandma is like a lot of those gags are like, if not verbatim in Roger Rabbit, they're like very similar. When there's the like Jessica Rabbit lookalike, and then I feel like the mask has like multiple like direct references to this also. Like he turns into a wolf and whistles in that movie, so it's like
Oh.
I don't know if you can get more of like a direct reference than that, but
I have a quick question. This is just for my own knowledge. So I saw that this came to theaters May 8th, 1943, which May 8th is my birthday. So just, I don't know, I feel extra connected to this film. But obviously, like whenever we go to the theater today, we see trailers and ads before. Are y'all more familiar with like the structure of cinema going and like when shorts were they played before features, like just in this 40s in this time period?
This is something that I'm always trying to get more information about it because I'm kind of fascinated by it, like the way that movies were
mm,
programmed at the time. Um, and there's I'm sure that there are some more definitive sources than the ones that I have found. But like I haven't found a lot of super concrete stuff. That being
Mm,
said, my understanding is that it was typically um, the movie preceded by a short, either animated or live action, and a newsreel. I
mm,
think that was like the most typical way that it was like short and newsreel, then movie, then probably trailers, being the namesake of the word trailer, that it
mm,
trails behind the
mhm,
movie. And then it loops. I mean, that's another part that I've been a little unclear on. Is there's part of the sort of legend of the movie Psycho that it was sort of normal for people to walk in the middle of a movie and then watch the second half and then just wait and watch the first half later. And Hitchcock
mm.
mandated that they didn't do that or they didn't allow people to do that for Psycho, which is kind of mind blowing to me that that would have been a normal thing before. So
Right,
I guess
yeah.
the idea was that, yeah, they were looping movies before and people would just walk in whenever.
And
Yeah.
that's how it works at like museums, right? There's like they got the like the gorilla movie playing, and you just kind of walk in
Oh, yeah.
and like watch it, and then it it loops.
I think a lot of that stuff is
Um,
ticketed these days, but I know what you're talking about. Like
I
in a
mean, like
gallery, yeah.
yeah, like at the Academy Museum, they have this like whole sound design thing about like the opening of Raiders and with like Ben Burt talking about it, and that just loops, and it's like, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes, probably closer to 15. And both times I went there, I was like, walked in during it, I was like, wait, I want to watch this whole thing.
Have you been to the Academy Museum, Ambriehl?
Yeah, so when I interned for the Academy in 2019, it was still under construction. So I actually got to see it like before it was all built up, which was super cool. But yeah, I went back in either 2022 or 23. It was when they had what did they have? I know they had like an Almodovar walk-in thing. It wasn't like a full exhibit. Yeah, I'm blanking on what else they had at the time. I know like a bunch of stuff from Citizen Kane, which might be part of the permanent exhibition. But yeah, no, I loved it. I really loved it, and I'm glad that it finally came to fruition because there was just so many issues plaguing it before it actually opened.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can find like articles about it from maybe 2019, 2018, but there was a lot of drama behind the scenes. So,
Interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah,
I want to look it up now. Get some good gossip on the Academy Museum.
So obviously, like this was 1943, and I was reading because it's a very sexual cartoon. So I decided to look up just like if there were any opponents to this film when it came out, things like that. And apparently, it actually the original ending, which was censored for reasons I'll get to, but apparently the original ending had the wolf and the grandma getting married and then having half wolf, half human children. Yes. However, it was deleted because obviously that implies bestiality. And it also kind of like, doesn't take the institution of marriage seriously. So I thought that was a little fun fact. Because I was like, there's no way that they just like, made this film and everybody was fine with it. So there's that.
The ending of the movie that exists though is like still pretty intense, like him, and also just a great final laugh of the the wolf is like, I'll kill myself before I ever go after another dame. He sees Red Hot Riding Hood and then shoots himself with two guns at the same time.
That's a good like microcosm of just like the cartooniness of this. Like he doesn't just shoot himself; he shoots himself with two guns simultaneously.
Yeah,
it's funny because I hadn't really thought about it that much. It does feel like it is like pushing against the limits of the Hays Code for sure. And I also wonder if there were like if they were more lenient on cartoons. Like if you tried to do any of these jokes like in live action, if that was even possible to do, I doubt that it would be as accepted.
yeah. It does seem like way edgier than you might see in any American movie at this time. Well, if we're done with this movie, why don't we move on to our feature presentation?
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
So yeah, Shadow of a Doubt, Hitchcock's movie, entry for 1943. And a movie that he has on a number of occasions called his favorite of all of the ones he's ever made.
Right. Which I don't know if I'd ever heard that before, and I'm a little surprised that he picked.
I was very surprised to hear that.
Yeah, it's yeah. What are your all's feelings on Shadow of a Doubt?
Pretty good. Not my favorite Hitchcock movie. I think there's a lot to like about it. There's a lot of things that are there's like some kind of innovative stuff about it, but I think it does feel like pretty like classical Hitchcock, like tension, like the bubbling like insidiousness of like people that's like just under the surface. And it also has like definitely some kind of Hitchcock perviness to it also. It's got a bunch of train stuff. Hitchcock loves trains. Mm-hmm. Lots of talk of murder and like kind of like pitch black humor. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm surprised that he was like, this is my favorite one, not like Psycho or North by Northwest or like, I don't know. I feel like those movies I think are much better. But
yeah, it's got a weird amount of jolliness in it for a Hitchcock movie. Like until it really like sinks in that we're dealing with a murderer, an undercover murderer. There's just a lot of like nice times and joviality for like 40 minutes of this movie.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think some parts of this movie work really well, and I think other parts really kind of didn't work for me very much. But I might have been like trying to get ahead of the movie a little too much because it's a pretty straightforward setup. I think I was kind of expecting sort of like a double twist or like more of like a twist ending situation or like there to be more like of a reveal to it. And I think it's like yeah, the movie as it is presented like pretty much from the get go is what you get. I think I was sort of like maybe after watching The Lodger too because I feel like
Mm.
the first act of both this and The Lodger, I think are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was sort of almost expecting. I was like, is this going to be like a The Lodger situation? And then it very much isn't. And I think I was sort of maybe expecting him to try to do more of a, like a take on that movie or like a twist on that movie's premise. And I don't really think that's what like this movie's about. This is a lot less like of a twist movie than I think I went into it expecting it to be.
Hmm.
So that maybe that's on me.
No, I was the same exact way because immediately after finishing the movie, because this was my first time watching it, and I had seen some like earlier Hitchcock, but most of the stuff I've seen is, later in his career.
Mm-hmm.
But some of my favorite Hitchcock movies, obviously Psycho, which, you have this crazy twist. I love Dial M for Murder. It's so fast paced and I feels like, every second is a twist. North by Northwest, I mean, you just have this like, it's has that thriller vibe. You have the iconic scene of like the plane trying to go after Cary Grant's character. So I was expecting just those big moments. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever I watched it, because, from the very beginning, that this guy is up to no good, that something is off. And we know that young Charlie essentially knows his secret or is going to, get very close to it very soon. So I was expecting, yeah, just more twists and thrills. And this one, like you said, it's very straightforward. Um, so immediately after, I was kind of like, oh, that's disappointing. But I went back and did some reading about it. And I think the reading that I did made me appreciate the film more. And I know, Chris, you mentioned how there's like a level of joviality to this film.
Mm-hmm.
And based on what I was kind of gathering from different sources I read and just like my own experience from the film, I wonder if that was intentional, considering that one of the major themes of this film is the ordinary. It's something that's talked about a
Mm.
lot. So I kind of wonder if it has that vibe because it's trying to feel, inviting, like, the girl next door, this is the film next door or whatever. And the point is, like, we're uncovering something sinister. So I think that joviality really plays into it, especially how the film kind of traces like young Charlie's loss of innocence.
Mm.
And I think as you watch the film, you can see that occurring. But yeah, the joviality I think is probably intentional. It just makes it feel more, like suburban America. This is where happy things happen and happy people live. But actually, there's a murderer in town.
The way that you talk about it kind of makes me think of Blue Velvet in a way, like the premise of the white picket fence being a cover for the kind of horrific goings on beneath the surface.
Well, I actually think Lynch was, which since this is fairly recent, rest in peace, David Lynch. But I think Blue Velvet actually was kind of like directly inspired by Shadow of a Doubt. So
Oh,
yeah, I found that, and I actually saw, I think it was in Vanity Fair, they had an article that basically just summed up, a lot of David Lynch's work, but I thought summed up this film very well. And I wrote down the quote. It says, uh, Lynch saw the nightmare below the American dream. And I think that's exactly what this film was going for,
mm,
especially like I'm a huge history nerd, so I love to, talk about the historical context, but obviously it's wartime and this isn't when suburbia is like really blowing up, but it's at the early stages. And of course, at this time, well, and a little bit later, like 50s, 60s, you have white flight and everything. But I think there's the idea that this smaller town or like the suburban area is safe and calm and peaceful and ordinary. But, there's actually this very sinister underbelly right there, which, like David Lynch, that's a lot of his work, honestly.
Yeah, I did think of, I was reminded of Blue Velvet watching this. I think, yeah, that like, yeah, the like sort of very kind of classical, like Americana imagery that is sort of papering over this, like, yeah, sinister darkness.
We always forget to kind of do like a quick plot summary, and I realized that we
Oh.
did again. But
Let's do that now.
This movie is about Uncle Charlie, who is actually a serial killer, who is fleeing from the law on the East Coast, goes to the West Coast to hang out with his relatives, and particularly his niece, who is named after him, young Charlie, and some kind of detectives have followed him from the East Coast and are investigating him while he's trying to kind of blend in and appear normal in front of his relatives and in front of the town. But he keeps doing suspicious things, like having a ring with the engraved name of someone else on it, or having a lot of money that he's that he's trying to deposit into the bank. And eventually he starts trying to kill his niece when she finds out what's going on.
I think there's a lot of this movie is characters behaving in insanely, like, suspicious ways. Not just Uncle Charlie. It's like, I feel like every character in this is, like, very bad at hiding anything. Like, Uncle Charlie is, like, pretty much, is, like, very suspicious from kind of the get-go. Not necessarily as soon as he arrives at, like, at the family's house. But then, like, the detectives are also super suspicious and bad at their jobs, and, like, they're trying to kind of, like, have this cover of like government kind of like census people who want to come into the house and take pictures and interview everyone, and they're doing it in the most suspicious way possible. And they're so bad at hiding it. And I think that was kind of one of the things. I think that the two detective characters I think are like, maybe it's Hitchcock trying to like make them buffoonish, but I feel like those characters like did not work for me. I did not find the sort of like romantic subplot with the one detective. I didn't think that worked at all. Like, I thought it felt like it sort of arose out of seemingly nowhere and just felt very forced and kind of tacked on. But Joseph Cotton, I think, is very good at playing sort of like a very charming creep, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, but like, he plays it in a very good way where, like, he is genuinely very charming. And yet then when he, like, does something that's suspicious, you're like, oh no, but I liked him though.
Also, by the way, like, our third Joseph Cotton year in a row. He's
yeah, he's crushing it. He's just in all the big movies in the 40s, I guess.
And isn't he in the 1944 Gaslight?
Oh, is he?
The very next year? Yeah, I think it's...
I guess we'll find out.
There were two versions of Gaslight.
I think we skipped the earlier one, and then...
Yeah, the first one was the British one from 1940 that we skipped.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, the 1944 one, I think he was in that one too.
See, this is good that you're saying that, because people are always like talking to us about classic movies, and I'm just like, I haven't got there yet. Like, I don't know. I haven't seen Gaslight.
We're very well versed in everything up until the year that we're doing that week, and then it's like...
okay, wow. Our Joseph Cotton quadruple feature continues.
Yeah. 100% Cotton.
Something else I'll add about this film, though, is so the first time I watched it, obviously I'm just, watching it as a vibe, whatever. The second time I tried to pay more attention, and I noticed in the scene where he's arriving into town on the train, I love that because you see this like, plume of black smoke filling the air from the train. And behind that, it's the most beautiful, clear sky. So I feel like that right there is telling you, like, hey, evil's
Wow.
coming to town. There's something sinister about to happen. And then also, whenever he gets off the train and he's kind of like faking, being injured or whatever, I thought of Willy Wonka whenever he comes out to meet the
Mhm.
kids and then he's like, faking like he's limping and stuff and then does a whole somersault. And
Hmm.
obviously, just thinking of Willy Wonka, you know how like sinister that ends up being. So it made me think of the same thing. So yeah, on my second watch, I was like, oh, okay. So this film is telling us like evil's coming to town. Something strange is about to go down.
I love that image with the black smoke. That's it's really cool. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful image when you take a look at it because there's just like it's literally just polluting the air as if his arrival is tainting this town.
Hmm.
So I think I did think about while watching this movie was I thought there might be a twist where he isn't actually their Uncle Charlie and he's someone who is sort of like taken his place. Because there's a whole thing like they haven't seen him in a long time, and then there are no photographs of him because he refuses to be photographed. And like I thought that like there was going to be a twist of like no, this is like a guy who looks similarly to their uncle.
I'm
Who has,
wearing
like,
the
murdered
face of your
him.
uncle.
Yeah, or just like he's like a guy that knew his uncle that like killed him and took his identity or something. I mean that doesn't really make sense because once he shows up, it's like well they all know who their uncle like they've met him before like that wouldn't work. I thought that might be where the movie was going. That it doesn't at all. But and then also there's like a lot of just weird tension between the two Charlies that feels like it's like the Hitchcock perviness rearing its head a little bit. Like I don't really know what to make of it, but it's like there's some weird shit going on there. Is all I feel like that's all I really have to say about it.
Something I'll add to that is also on my second watch, I noticed whenever we meet Uncle Charlie and Young Charlie, like the scene is almost parallel to each other, where we find Uncle Charlie laying in bed in his like dark suit, and then we see the detectives outside. And then whenever we meet Young Charlie, she's also in the bed, and it's almost like the same exact angle. So I don't know, what to make of those parallels because I'm sure there's more throughout the film that I didn't catch. But yeah, I was definitely thinking a lot about their potentially incestuous weird relationship. Also, yeah, I didn't know what to make of it, but I felt it for sure.
I mean, it does feel like sort of a like a reflection of this sort of corruption of uh like familiarity and normal interactions. Like if there is something sexual, it is a it's a similar situation of like a relationship that would be pure, like a town that would be pure, that is being tainted by the presence of this evil person.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the movie is like trying to imply more to that maybe, and that was a thing that I'm sure was like not Breen and the Hays Code were not happy about. I don't know if this movie ever got pushback on anything, but also the shots of them like in their respective beds in different cities, I think are mirrored also. Like they're both kind of facing, like if you were put them side by side, I think they're like facing each other, which I hadn't picked up on that, but that's it is like a makes sense as kind of they're drawing a lot of parallels between those two characters before they ever actually like share the frame.
A couple other things that I want to mention. There was like a really I really like shots like this where there was like when young Charlie is starting to sort of doubt the goodness of her uncle that she has all this respect for and everything. It shows there's a particular shot where she kind of starts feeling this tension and doubt, and it doesn't show her face, it shows her hands. It shows her hands just kind of being like expressing her nervousness, and I found it very effective, like a more subtle way of expressing that thing. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is there's this kind of like side thing going on in this whole movie of her dad and his best friend being big like true crime junkies, basically.
Yeah, they're obsessed with murder and like hypothetically discussing how they would murder each other in like in a very like cheery conversational way. That is a very funny gag. I feel like there wasn't anything where I was expecting that to maybe like kind of play into the plot a little bit more, which I guess it kind of does, but that is like a funny like recurring thing. Oh, but then I also wanted to bring up the younger sister in the family who is constantly reading books.
Oh,
The little nerd girl.
The little nerd girl who's like reads like 8 books a day. Just really funny scenes. Like there's a bit where I forget what the sister says, but then someone's like, "Don't be literary. Like, get out of here. Stop being a nerd." This movie does have, I think, a common Hitchcock thing. It's like the supporting cast is really good. Like the characters feel really distinctive. Like all the family members, all the sort of like people in the town, even just like if they have one scene, there's like one of young Charlie's, I guess, like former school classmates works at like the bar, and it's just like that's just like a bartender character that like doesn't really play into anything. It's just kind of there, but it's like feels like such a distinctive character, even though she's in one scene.
I agree. I picked up on the same thing, and kind of going back to what Chris said about you mentioned something about like young Charlie's hands whenever she like officially found out. Can you repeat that part? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Man, I'm trying to remember the exact scene, but like it was when she was kind of getting information, I believe, that was like seeming to incriminate her uncle that she loves so much, and so she was kind of like wringing her hands and expressing her anxiety through her hands.
Yeah, so the scene where they're like on the way to the bar, first I thought it was just a funny scene when she like starts to cross the street and the crossing guard yells at her and is like, "Hey, you can't do that in this town." I just thought it was like a cute little highlight of, wow, crosswalking or jaywalking, whatever, is one of like the worst things you can do in the town at this moment. And she seemed like very surprised by the crossing guard's reaction, so I thought that was funny. But when they're actually like walking into the bar, or maybe it's when they're already inside, I noticed that, yeah, it's when they're inside and Charlotte's like sitting down. She's kind of like, she has both of her hands on her elbows, kind of like, touching the other arm's elbow, looking very nervous. And then there's another part like shortly after that where I think he touches her and she says, "Don't touch me." So the physicality I thought was
Hmm.
very interesting, but also like with that bartender, she briefly tells, her life story about how I think she says she's worked at every restaurant in town or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was supposed to be meaningful, but I did think it was interesting, because it just seemed like she was very beaten down by
Hmm.
this town, and maybe like another example of something that is, average, but average in a negative way.
Or maybe like also emphasizing the kind of not holistic window that this kind of typical American family, quote unquote, has even on the town that they're in, right? They
Yeah.
have this like American dream vision of their own reality, that it's not just problematized by their serial killer cousin, or uncle. It's problematized by like maybe these ways that like there is some more complexity in this town that they just are
Mm-hmm.
not party to.
Yeah, very well said.
Yeah. I think that I guess I didn't really realize about this movie until I watched. There's a really good video essay on YouTube about how this movie uses location shooting. Because I guess during World War II, there were a lot of restrictions on how much money Hollywood studios could spend, and so they end up reusing a lot of sets and backlot things. And this movie is basically all sort of like town exteriors and interiors that typically I guess they would have had to build. But since there were all these limits on like how much film stock they could use and how much money they had to spend on sets, ended up just shooting it at the town Santa Rosa, where it's also set. And that it does kind of give the movie a bit more of a I had kind of a grounded, like, realism to it, I guess, than because it's not shot in a back lot or on sets as much. It does feel a little bit more. The town has a bit more kind of specificity and character to it. Also, I think that it's just a real town, and because it's like I feel like there was a lot of location shooting in silent movies. Like a lot of times they were just go outside and film someone like driving a car around. Whereas I think once they made the switch to sound, it was like because the microphones were so terrible, they were forced to shoot everything on a back lot. And I guess this was kind of one of an early example-ish of like a Hollywood sound movie that's shot almost entirely on location, which is pretty cool.
It's kind of weird that like location shooting was cheaper in this case. I guess because they didn't need to construct the thing, but usually that's the opposite is the case.
Yeah, I think it's like a weird curve because like I think anything that I ever made is like super, super low budget, and it's like it's usually cheaper. Like it's sometimes very expensive to like, rent out locations or something like that, but it is usually cheaper just to find a place to go to rather than build something. But I think once you have like a little bit more money to spend, then it ends up being cheaper to build it. So it is like, I think it's one of those weird sort of curves of once you have a little bit more money, it's somehow cheaper.
When I went to when I went to LA for the first time, I did the Paramount Studios tour, and I went to the back lot, and they were, they have these backlot sets that they reuse in many cases, but they'll do like kind of alterations to fit the movie itself. And so while we were going through all the backlots, I saw like a bunch of people working on kind of remaking one of the sets in order to just look the certain way that it needed to be for whatever they were about to shoot there. And I was like, that seems like a dream job to me. Like I love like work. I'm not like a super, able person when it comes to construction-y type stuff. My dad shames me about it all the time, but but like I do like working with my hands, and I like being involved in like creative stuff, and I'm like, oh great, like that would be the job for me, to be like the person like painting the bricks on the fake bricks on the studio set. So love that kind of stuff.
I did have a friend of mine shot her thesis film at Brooklyn College and built a set for it that I helped build. That was I think the only time I've ever really like been part of a production that like was fully shot on a set that was built specifically for the project. And it was very cool. Like it was cool to build it, and it was cool to see it like dressed with. It was a movie about a hoarder, so there was like it was dressed with just like so much stuff everywhere, and it was all just like real stuff people brought in and just like piled up, and then it was like there for a week or whatever, and then like a day after it was finished, it was like completely gone, which is just bananas.
I want to mention, so as I was watching it the first time, I only wrote down like 5 bullet points throughout the whole film, but one of them was the quote, "faded, fat, greedy women." And I just want to address, it's the scene where they're talking about widowers, and obviously like the people, his victims were widowers. And first of all, it's wonderful acting, but like Charlie's monologue, where he's talking about, he's basically saying, like, you can feel his hatred for widowers specifically. And he starts off by saying, women in the cities are different than, the people in these smaller towns like Santa Rosa, I guess, at the time. But he straight up starts just kind of unleashing, and he basically says like, these widowers, they take their husband's money after they die, and they just don't know what to do with themselves. They spend it, they're silly, blah blah blah. And I wrote down that he called them horrible, useless, and then faded, fat, greedy women. And then someone in the scene says, they're alive, they're human beings. And he says, are they? So I thought that was an interesting just like insight into, since mind you, he's a serial killer, into like the dehumanization of his victims. And it kind of made me analyze his interactions with young Charlie even more, and it kind of like highlights that just sinister nature that he has.
Yeah, I think that scene in particular really kind of like shows his misanthropic nature, but I think it is kind of more what's the other one? What's the female centric one?
Misogynistic.
Yeah, like it I was like, oh, he's a misogynist. That's his deal. And yeah, because I mean, it's one of I think kind of the few times where it's like it does feel like a kind of a more of a clear window into what his like thought process is. I think a lot of the rest of the time he has like this veil of charm or decency that then gets pulled back very very quickly and suddenly, and like I think that too of like seeing him go from being like a very like charming, seemingly like nice person to like on a dime be like really scary is I thankfully haven't met that many people like that, but it's something I've heard a lot about like psychopaths and just like messed up abusive people is that like that thing like they go from being very charming to being really scary like in an instant. I think Joseph Cotton does that really really effectively.
Yeah, it speaks to like the compartmentalization, I think, that allows him to do this. That he sorts people into like worthy of death or not worthy of death when it's convenient for him.
Mm-hmm.
Bad man, Uncle Charlie. Not a fan.
Those little moments where, because like most of the film he's charming, but those little moments that let you more into his psyche are really so terrifying. Because we have the one where he's talking about the widowers, but then I think it's later in the film he's talking about, again, going back to like the conversation of what's ordinary, and he's talking to young Charlie, and it's like this long monologue, and he just sounds so threatening in it. And yeah, I mean, I guess in the context of like viewing this as someone who is abusive, I don't know. I guess I'm curious, like what conversations at the time looked like, because obviously conversations in 2025 about abuse don't look the same as they did back in 1943. But I'm just curious how audiences kind of reacted to that character, who actually he's based on a real person.
That's true. I looked that up.
Yeah, you want to tell that story?
I don't remember all the details, but like they did take a lot of. There was a serial killer of like older widows who was also like had a head injury as a child because he like rode his bike into like a streetcar or something like that. And that too is like a weird thing where it's like it is definitely kind of implied in the movie that it's like this childhood head injury is kind of what possibly is like responsible for his like psychopathic tendencies, his murderous urges, which I know there is like precedent for. I mean, like what's the railroad spike guy, Phineas Gage, right? Who like became a different person, and yeah, I think there was other details that this movie kind of took directly from the real murderer. I don't know, Ambriehl, if you remember more about it than I do.
Yeah, just a few things. I know. So I think his real name was Earl Nelson, but his nickname was Gorilla Man for some reason. I didn't feel like diving far enough into like why he's called Gorilla Man.
I think just because strangling people, like
oh, okay, yeah,
that people thought that's like gorillas don't strangle as a thing, but I guess in the I think it was the 1920s that he was he was murdering. That is also like the most 1920s name for a serial killer. He's the Gorilla Man.
Literally. Quite literally. The press, I don't know, they hadn't really come up with those bangers yet, I guess.
Yeah.
But he actually murdered like middle-aged landladies, and he would like rent from them temporarily in order to get close to them, and then like serial rapist, serial murderer, all that. So bad guy. Yeah, just like Charlie.
Yeah. The Gorilla Man, not a fan.
Nah.
Gorillas, though. Actual gorillas, big fan.
One time I was in the Bronx Zoo, and I put my hand up to the glass and touched my hand to the gorilla.
Yeah, cats and gorillas are my favorite things on this planet. Like I follow so many gorilla accounts on Instagram. It's like really embarrassing, but so much of my feed is just gorillas, and honestly, I appreciate it. Like I need a break from everything else going on in the world.
For sure.
What are some good, just for my own sake? What are some good gorilla accounts? Because I feel like I want to follow some.
The big one that I follow, I think it's a place in Japan, and the at name is gorilla underscore iro iro underscore no. So yeah, that's a very big one, and they post constant gorilla clips. And the other ones are just random, and I think my algorithm also just knows what I like, so they show me a whole bunch
It's like
that are
you watch one gorilla video, suddenly it's like all gorilla videos. Yeah,
literally. And I'm not complaining, honestly. Like I'm not complaining, so I will take it.
Y'all mentioned that this was based on a real person, which I kind of didn't make this connection before, but like, Psycho was also based on Ed Gein, right?
I mean, vaguely. I actually feel like the Ed Gein thing is like a bit more tenuous in Psycho than in this case. Seems like this shares a lot more details with an actual person, but
I guess it kind of made me realize that like this I didn't even think of this, that like the murder obsessed older men in this movie are just like Hitchcock insert characters.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Wait, did y'all catch Hitchcock's cameo in this film?
No.
Because the first time I watched it, I did not. But I was like, I need to find this. And it's, I think, like 15, 16 minutes into the movie. And you only see the back of his head. So, but like, obviously, it's Hitchcock. It's on the train. And I think it's when like Uncle Charlie is boarding. And he runs into this older couple and they're playing bridge. And the guy they're sitting across from is Hitchcock. So I was like, I need to know where that little cameo is.
Yeah. I forgot to even look for it, so.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like anytime I watch a Hitchcock, I'm like, where are you, dude? Like, it's not a Hitchcock if you're not in it.
Right. He's in there somewhere. Exactly. Yeah.
I guess the only other thing I had to say about this film is kind of going back to like the concept of abuse. I thought it was interesting. And one critique I have of the film is I feel like the end just moves so fast and you're just like,
so abrupt.
What? Yeah, it's very abrupt. Because you see them, on the train, he's about to kill her, and then he's the one that dies. And then it very quickly shows us at a church, outside of his funeral. And you hear the pastor or whoever saying, this guy was a hero, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's interesting how, in modern conversations of abuse, we talk about like the culture of silence and how this film is showing that exact same thing with, he essentially died with that secret and left Charlotte, young Charlie, with all that pain, I guess.
Right, because he's like a hero to the community, right? He's like giving speeches and like everyone seems to love him. I actually hadn't really thought of that, because like it ends in a place where, I guess only. I mean, the rest of her family, I think, would also know, but. Yeah, that is. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it, and that kind of makes the ending better.
I mean, I think that was all more or less that we had on Shadow of a Doubt, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
So yeah, Cabin in the Sky, which was your pick from I don't know, probably a year ago. You told me that you wanted to talk about this movie.
Yeah. I have always loved the film, and it's funny because I'll tell other people to watch it and they're like, okay, that was a film, whatever. But what really amazes me is just like the level of performances, because this really was just like a showcase of the top Black talent of the day, from like Lena Horne, Eddie Rochester Anderson, Ethel Waters, to you have Duke Ellington and like Louis Armstrong.
Yeah.
So I love it for that reason. And there's another film, Stormy Weather, also starring Lena Horne, that I think came out in the same year, 43. That film, so that's the one, if you've seen, are you familiar with the Nicholas brothers?
I am not, no.
Okay, well, they were like two, their brothers, famous dancers, and there's an incredible scene of them, and this is in the film Stormy Weather, of them. I can't even describe it honestly, but they're like doing splits over each other while going down the stairs, and it's just, I'll send it to y'all later. But I like that film because it's kind of the same thing, another big studio effort of like Black performers. But Stormy Weather is more so like literally just that. There's not a whole lot of plot, whereas Cabin in the Sky at least has a little bit of plot. So yeah, that's the reason I like it. Yeah. What did y'all think?
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, fun movie. It definitely, I think, stands out from a lot of other musicals. I mean, primarily just because it has an all-black cast, which is unfortunately very unusual for the early 40s. But then it has it, like, I like its, on its kind of magical realism, too. The whole sort of, like, not really angel and devil, but, like, General and Lucifer Jr. As like they're just like presence of like trying to kind of subtly influence different things, or also just like them reacting to different stuff is really fun. And then just like the music and the dancing is incredible.
Yeah, the songs in this movie are great. Definitely like stand out for me. Like I think that a lot of the jokes related to the devil characters are really good. But yeah, the music, like the songs are great, especially I think Ethel Waters. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of her just belting is incredible.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like where to even start with this film. I mean, just because we just talked about like the incredible dancing. I don't know if y'all caught this, but this film is credited for having like the first on-screen moonwalk. It is in the scene where this like it's the tap dancer in he's like in the kitchen or somewhere in the house
Mm-hmm.
doing a whole tap dance, and yeah, he does the moonwalk for like 2 seconds. So I don't know if that was like, even significant back then, but in hindsight, people were like, oh, first one. So that was really interesting. But I guess something that fascinates me about this film is, so we have, the angel and devilish characters, and obviously it's wartime, and you have like the good guy being the general. I thought that was
Mm.
interesting. And this film itself is not super high on like the, military propaganda. Stormy Weather, I would say, is definitely more explicit in that. But I have some notes about this film. So obviously there were not a whole bunch of like all black cast, especially made by major studios. um so just like this kind of timeline I want to lay down is, this is a time where they're really encouraging Black people to join the military. So the year before, 1942, there was a booklet called Negroes in the War that was distributed, and it basically just, celebrated various Black people in their military accomplishments, and of course tried to get more people to join. And then you have this film, which again, not super strong on the military propaganda, but like it's a little bit there.
Mm.
But then the next year, 1944, you have the documentary The Negro Soldier, which is like a very direct attempt at trying to get Black people to join the military.
Hmm.
So I always find that really interesting. And actually, so the Bureau of Motion Pictures, which was part of the Office of War Information, of course, had a lot of their hands in Hollywood. And I thought it was interesting because I found this quote. It's from the Bureau of Motion Pictures script review. They called this film, they said it depicts African Americans as, quote, simple, ignorant, superstitious folk incapable of anything but the most menial labor. So I thought that was an interesting take. But on the other hand, you had the NAACP praising the film, saying
Right.
that the treatment of this Black fable, which avoided cliche and racial stereotypes, is something to be celebrating. So just some of the reactions to the film were really interesting. And if you're ever, that interested, you can go online. The Margaret Herrick Library, which is, part of the Academy, they have a lot of their digital collections available online. So I actually went and found the actual script notes. And a lot of it is just like, you can't say the word hell here, you can't say the word hell there, you say the word hell twice in this scene, and them freaking out. But there are some interesting notes about just like how it could potentially be received. So
Goddamn. You're just showing us up by one, watching a movie twice, and two, going to the archives and looking at script notes. Incredible.
I will say I've literally done a presentation on this film before, like several years ago. So I just pulled up my notes from then. But go ahead, Glenn.
I was thinking if we watched like 1 or 2 movies for every episode, we probably would go that deep on each one. But I think the fact that we watched like 5 to 7 kind of makes
That's
it a
fair.
little bit harder to do. Should we? I mean, we should do a plot synopsis, right?
Oh yeah.
Little Joe tries to be good, but his pious wife to his pious wife Petunia, but he has a gambling problem. Eventually, he runs afoul of Domino Johnson and is shot while at the club. As he's dying at home, he sees visions of Lucifer Jr. and demons ready to take him to hell. Petunia prays for him, and the strength of her prayer summons the general and his angels. The two parties strike a deal. They'll wipe Joe's memory and give him 6 months to redeem his ways. The devils and angels spend that 6 months trying to influence him toward heaven or hell, and the demons get a big win by sending seductress Georgia Brown and by giving him a winning lottery ticket. He tries to stay on the right path, but a critical moment of misunderstanding between him and Petunia sends him down the wrong one. At the end of his 6 months, Petunia arrives at the nightclub, and after some back and forth and a scuffle, Petunia prays to God to smite the entire sinful place. God sends a tornado, and they're both killed. At the pearly gates, Joe regains his memory and realizes that he messed up his chance. Petunia is about to be sent to heaven, and Lucifer Jr. is about to take him to hell, when at the last minute it's revealed that the tragedy at the nightclub has convinced Georgia Brown to donate all the money Little Joe had given her to the church, pushing him right over the edge into heaven eligibility. As they head together into heaven, Little Joe wakes up and realizes that this had all been a dream since he was initially shot in the club, and Little Joe learns his lesson and becomes a pious good man.
Wow, what a wholesome story.
That is for sure the most concise, best plot synopsis we have done because you wrote it down ahead of time. Like it's usually us being like, "What happened?" So thank you for that.
Yeah, that was great.
You know, we were talking about Looney Tunes earlier with Red Hot Riding Hood, and I feel like this kind of devil and angel on your shoulder stuff is like so baked into me from Looney Tunes specifically. I don't know like where that idea comes from. There probably is like some source or whatever of the idea of a devil and angel working their angles on you.
Is it the Bible? I'm not sure.
could be the Bible.
It's like, no, it's Looney Tunes. No, it's vaudeville.
But yeah, no, I thought that was like a really fun element. Ambriehl, you were talking about war also, and like one of the great parts in this movie is when the devils are brainstorming ideas on how to, you know, make things difficult for Little Joe to be to go on the right path, and you know, the Lucifer Jr. is rejecting all these ideas, and you're like, oh, you're all my B idea guys. All the A guys are over there in Europe.
I also wrote that down. I was like, that's a good joke. Very, very topical.
I also love that scene because in that, I think like one of the plots was to, I don't know, give him a bunch of money and watch him self-destruct with all of the new money and new wealth that he has. And I thought that was interesting because like it's this paternalistic idea that like it's better for him to not have money, because if he does have money, then he's just going to go off the wagon and go crazy and, you know, ruin his life. And I thought about that idea in relation to just like, I mean, obviously this applies to so much of world history, but like the paternalistic ideas of essentially like oppressors saying, hey, we're actually going to limit your freedom, and it's going to be better for you because if we give you this freedom or if we give you this money, you're going to go crazy and you don't know what's best for you. So I honestly, I don't know if anyone at the time was kind of thinking the same thing, but in my 2025 brain, that was one of the first thoughts I had in that scene.
It feels like it sidesteps it a little bit because of the all black cast, because like it is, you know, I think they're the kind of I don't know, like circa 1860 pro-slavery argument that you mention, it would be more obvious if there were kind of white oppressors or white like kind of puppet masters in this
Mhm.
movie. But like it does seem like it is engaging with that idea, maybe without like engaging with the it may be engaging with the idea, but maybe without like some of the more horrific implications of if like they weren't black themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
But regardless, like they were, the demonic characters coming up with those ideas.
Hmm.
So that was interesting.
With like the devil characters do also say like we've gotten so many people with this with like just by giving them money,
Mhm.
which I mean like there is I think like a kernel of truth to that too. Just like I do think wealth can be a corrupting force on people.
Definitely.
Um, it makes me wonder like right what like how that was intended. I don't know. I know this is based on a play. I don't know who wrote the play or if that element plays into it or not.
Do you know, Ambrielle, if it was like black um like talent like working on the original script of the play?
I believe so. I know it played on Broadway. Let me search right now. So yeah, it opened on Broadway in 1940. Yes, there were all black casts. Yeah, so it was actually described as, quote, a parable of Southern Negro life with echoes of Ferenc Molnar's Lilium and Mark Connolly's The Green Pastures. I'm not familiar with Lilium, whatever that is. Um, but yeah, it it is interesting just watching it and seeing how this is like probably one of the films that laid the template for what kind of like got Tyler Perry famous was like these morality plays where you have like very religious people and it's also encouraging a specific way of life with through the use of comedy. But I don't know, it just gave like very Tyler Perry, who I could talk about him for hours because I have plenty of things to say about that man. But yeah, I don't know, I was like, wow, this is like, I wonder if this is the blueprint for that.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah. And I think maybe Glenn, you too, like grew up pretty non-religiously. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to like think about this like from this sort of like within religious perspective. Like how like this movie is about like going to heaven and hell and being like a pious person and someone who loves God and acts in the right way. Um but it I guess it doesn't it's weird. It feels the experience of watching the movie doesn't feel preachy in the kind of off-putting way that I think a
I think
lot of
so too.
religious-y kind of stuff ends up feeling for me at least.
I think it's kind of the fact that this movie is feels more like a fairy tale than a sort of
Yeah.
like morality tale necessarily. Like yeah, there are morals, and it is very much like yes, going to church means you are good, and gambling means you are bad. Like it's very kind of I don't know. Uh, it's sort of simplifying ideas down to fairy tale language, I guess. And I do think that right as I'm not particularly church going person myself. Um, it didn't feel like it was necessarily right. I wasn't like, oh, here we go, talking about how great going to church is. It's just like, yeah, it makes sense. Like that's yeah. I think within the context of the story, it just feels like a kind of natural progression. And yeah, I think the kind of comedy of it and the Christian iconography that it's using is so just like kind of baked into a lot of American storytelling anyway.
Ambrielle, you were saying that you could talk about Tyler Perry for a long time, but I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on the you made that comparison, but like some more detail on your thoughts about that because I ashamedly have never seen any Tyler Perry movie beyond Gone Girl, so
I don't think you need to be ashamed, first of all. Yeah. Whenever people ask me how I feel about him, it's very complex. But I guess like he's significant in my life simply because like I did grow up in a very religious household,
Hmm.
and he started like as a playwright, and he would film these productions on stage, and then release them on DVD, and that's kind of how I think he got his name more and more out there. And a lot of his earlier stuff was like very religious, very much like this, a lot of comedy, and he's kind of shifted away from that, but there's still a lot of those undertones in his work, which like it definitely appeals to a certain type of audience, and that audience not is definitely not me. I grew out of that a while ago.
Hmm.
But it's interesting to see how he's become so successful, like I mean a whole billionaire or whatever, which that's another topic. But how he's become so successful off of this kind of like template of storytelling, because it
Hmm.
does appeal very well to um I would say like a lot of older Black people who are very religious and grew up with that, like grew up in the church and stuff like that. So
Right. That's so interesting. I had, from the trailers, I had just kind of assumed it was all zany times with Medea, and not, I
mm.
didn't know about the religious angle at all.
Yeah, that is. I mean, yeah, I'd say honestly, I stopped watching his films several years ago. But yeah, early on, very, very all religious, and more recently, the most recent one I've seen probably came out like 4, 5 years ago. Um, yes, there's still like those mentions of and I don't know, maybe it's just something that you can't really escape from when like you grow up, especially in the Black church like I did, because
Hmm.
another reason, like when I started this film, and they have the scene of them all singing in the church, I one think it's interesting just because I think that was probably like a necessary thing at the time to portray Black people in church. I think it, because obviously this film was playing all over the nation,
Hmm.
except in places where it was banned, like Memphis, I think. um, but I think having these characters be very pious, one is like true to a lot of like the Black experience, especially in the South. But I also think for broader audiences, or for like white audiences, it probably made them more comfortable watching
Hmm.
a film, you know, where maybe they can relate to that, and they can't so much relate to more of the other issues presented in the film. But I think that makes it very broadly relatable.
Wow. Yeah. That's yeah, that's interesting.
I am curious about like how this movie was released. I couldn't find a lot of information about it, of like whether or not it was only shown in segregated theaters or not, or if it was sort of like marketed to a larger audience. I did read in Wikipedia that like a lot of theaters in the South refused to show it just on account of them there being Black actors in it, which is crazy, and that the cop showed up at one of them and like shut the movie down. Which is like I tried, I don't know why I'm like surprised by like racism in the South anymore, but even it's just like, come on, like what? How are you so threatened by this? Like,
I mean, this was the environment that created the the civil rights era.
right, yeah, and that's nothing compared to a lot of the other awful things that happened in this time period. But like, I don't know, Ambriehl, if you done research into like what the release of it was like, or sort of like how it was distributed or how it was received.
As soon as we heard that you did a whole presentation on this, we're like, what is it? Like, tell us, Ambrielle.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I don't really know much about the actual like distribution. I don't even know. I mean, again, I know it's MGM. It was one of the first all Black cast, by a major studio. I don't really know how exactly it was marketed, or what the responses were beyond some of the ones that I read to y'all earlier. um yeah, like you said, it was controversial just on account of it being Black. And you laughed, which I don't know, sometimes I feel like I laugh at the worst moments, but racism is funny sometimes because it's just so absurd and it just doesn't make sense. Like, why are you calling the cops to shut down this movie? Like, it's literally a movie of people singing and dancing about God.
I get the sense like they didn't object to like its subject matter or like what was happening in the film or like anything else about it, just the fact that it was a film starring Black people. They were
Yeah,
just
that's
like,
it.
No, can't have this.
Yeah.
Shut this down. Call
None
the
of
cops.
that.
Isn't that just kind of often the case for like, you know, morality boycotts of movies a lot of the time?
Right. Yeah.
Morality
Very
is usually code. I was listening to this podcast called "If Books Could Kill" with and Michael Hobbs is a gay journalist, was
Oh,
talking
I love
about like,
him.
oh yeah, he's
I
great.
listen to Maintenance Phase sometimes, and I've started listening to him on You're Wrong About.
Oh yeah, If Books Could Kill is really good. I highly recommend that podcast. But he was in a recent episode. He was they were talking about the, I don't know, the moral majority or something like that from like, you know, the neoconservatives from 20 years ago, and he was saying that like, you know, moral just means that you hate gay people and you don't want to say it, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, same kind of deal here, right? Is probably some kind of, you know, thin justification or papering over of kind of biased feelings. Yeah. Ambriehl, what's your history with this movie? I know, like, you know, you're saying you've been a fan of it for a while, right?
Yeah, I honestly don't remember the first time I watched it, but I just know over the years it's kind of stuck with me because I mean I am just a huge like jazz music fan, and I love history and especially Black history, and I love Hollywood history, so this brings them literally all together.
Nice.
So that's why the film has stuck with me. I'm also a huge Lena Horne fan.
We haven't mentioned
It's
her yet.
yeah.
True.
So Lena Horne plays the seductress in this film, and she has a very fascinating career that I won't, tell you all about right now. But she made this film when I think she was like 26. And something that's interesting is the on-screen kind of beef between Ethel Waters and Lena Horne. There was also beef off-screen, and there's actually like this funny story where apparently like Lena Horne was in a dance number or something, but she injured her ankle. And according to sources on set, Ethel Waters said, God works in mysterious ways.
Wow.
Yeah. So like there was like some
Damn.
true beef there. But I actually found this 1981 interview that she did with Dick Cavett. And of course, this is, 1981, so almost 40 years later. But she talks about her relationship with Ethel Waters, and it's really interesting because she has a very empathetic view of her. She basically says like, yeah, to Ethel Waters, someone who has been in the game since like the early 1900s, she started on vaudeville, worked her way all the way up. She probably thought I came in and was just sleeping around, which is not true, but there was kind of that bitterness of like the new girl in town, the young girl in town. Obviously, Lena is lighter skinned. She's thin. Ethel Waters was not. So like there was just that kind of baked in tension between them. And it also, you can see it in the film, which it kind of plays into a bunch of different like stereotypical or archetypical, whatever the word is, characters. But some people say that Ethel Waters' character Petunia in this film is kind of like the mammy. I don't know if I fully agree with that, or at least it's not the best representation of what I view as a mammy. But it is interesting how Lena Horne kind of fits into like the tragic mulatto character, the seductress who, like Lena Horne's character is very sexual in the film, whereas Petunia is all about God and all about doing what's right and blah, blah, blah. And actually, so Ethel Waters, she was one of the first people to sing the song Stormy Weather, which is, again, that musical that came out the same year as this, starring Lena Horne. It was called Stormy Weather. But she's the one who kind of like popularized the song. And then Lena Horne kind of took it and made it her own,
Mm.
stars in a film called Stormy Weather, singing this song. And in the like early 2000s, I want to say, at some point, her version of the song was actually like inducted into the like Grammy Hall of Fame or whatever. So it is just, I don't know, watching that Dick Cavett interview with her really made me think just about like the dynamic at that time and what it felt like to be Ethel Waters, you know, an older Black woman who's been working for like 30 plus years at this point and is kind of just now being like getting this true moment, versus Lena Horne, who's the new girl in town, who's singing my songs, you know.
Yeah, wow.
I just think
Right.
that's like an interesting dynamic.
It is like, you know, I thought maybe it's kind of a weakness of this movie, the simplicity that it paints Lena Horne's character with. Like, you know, the movie is dealing in these kind of like iconic, you know, archetypes. It's like
Yeah.
people are acting out archetypes, but it does, you know, it does feel, you know, reductive and misogynistic to have one of them just be like the sexy lady who ruins the time of everyone else, you know.
She's kind of a femme fatale. That's how I looked at it anyway. I do think this movie I think it's going for archetypes and does probably fall into stereotype also, but certainly, I mean, for like this, I always kind of I'm probably like for the time, but like comparing this movie to like Gone with the Wind is like such a huge difference. It's like completely. I feel like Gone with the Wind has almost just like it feels very much like it's like looking down on the Black characters almost, even though it's like kind of in the context of the story is trying to be like, oh no, like they're people, and it's like, no, movie, I can see like you're showing your hand a little too much here. Mm-hmm. Whereas this movie feels like it's just a movie about people that is in this kind of fairy tale style. But I think this movie, while maybe not being necessarily like from a modern perspective as progressive as it could have been, I still think is like feels like a much more honest movie that is a lot less concerned with. I guess I'm comparing it to Gone with the Wind, which is not a good comparison to make because that's like the worst possible example.
Yeah, you were saying like mammy characters, and I was like, oh, well, there's definitely some worse examples from right around then.
But I think even like the Elise Guy movie that we watched, I think is like the earliest known movie with an all black cast. That movie was like so much more stereotypical and is like was progressive for the time, but in like such a kind of like incremental way.
And that movie was called A Fool and His Money. It was kind of a similar premise, I guess, in a way. I guess I should, you know, you mentioned Gone with the Wind, and we have two actors here who are in Gone with the Wind.
Yeah. Wait, I know Butterfly McQueen. Who's the other one?
I think Rochester was in it too.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. I did not realize that.
I think it's like a smaller role. Yeah, Butterfly McQueen.
Once Butterfly McQueen shows up, I'm like, oh, she plays like a person in this.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, not to be mean or whatever, but as soon as Butterfly McQueen showed up, I was like, oh God, I recognize that voice.
Yeah, it really hurts. It really hurts. You know, I'm sure she was a lovely woman in real life, but I just don't know if I would have been able to have a conversation with her.
I mean, I don't know if I have like big thoughts about this movie. There are certain things I feel like I just wrote down that I want to like spotlight. Yeah. One is just like the production of this movie I was really impressed by. Like the club like getting destroyed at the end is pretty crazy. Like there's all this like pieces of the set that are just falling.
Yeah.
Like the roof caving in and even like the design of it once it's been destroyed with like the steps going up to heaven. As like, I don't even think it was a matte painting. It was just a painting, like a backdrop. It looks really cool.
Yeah, this kind of striking, jagged staircase. You were mentioning the club getting destroyed too, which featured a tornado, which was you know, tornado imagery that was shot for fellow MGM movie Wizard of Oz. And so it got to reap that those like incredible special effects rewards from that
Right.
movie. Also, something that shares with Wizard of Oz is that you waking up at the end and it was all a dream.
Yeah. In general, I don't like as a storytelling device. I think in both this and Wizard of Oz, they kind of get away with it. But it's all a dream. I'm just like, then what did I just watch? Come on. But at least in this, it has a point, and it does kind of play into the like fairy tale-ness of it. I guess we talked about the dance scenes, the whole kind of like third act in the club. I think is just like really well staged.
Yeah, so many cool. I mean, like they kind of take that opportunity to just like have a bunch of great songs, right? Like the movie does sort of like the plot sort of takes a backseat for a while, where they're just like everybody's gonna sing now, and it's all really
it does
good.
become like a Duke Ellington concert film for like a good 10 minutes, which like I'm fine with. Also, there are a couple more lines that really stuck out to me. Was there's a bit where Petunia says, "Sometimes when you fight the devil, you gotta jab him with his own pitchfork," which I like that line. And then at the end, when Ethel shows up at the club where Joe and Georgia Brown are hanging out, Joe is sort of like trying to appeal to her because they're still married at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "No, like come on, like this is all frivolous." And she says, "Save that sugar-coated talk for your girlfriend." It's like, oh damn, okay. And then there's the
one more thing to mention is that the one of those sequences in the club was directed by Busby Berkeley. And I knew that before going into the movie, and I was like, "Where is it? Where is it?" And then I see the really dramatic shadows on the wall. I was like, "Found it!"
Yeah.
This movie does have a lot of really good like shadow work. It's like when Lucifer Jr. first shows up, he appears as a shadow on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are a couple other times where that is kind of used as like you see a shadow before you see a person.
Yeah.
Which I just always like to see.
I like that both of you mentioned The Wizard of Oz, because another connection. So it was directed by Vincent Minnelli, and this was actually his like first feature film. Have never really been able to find much on like his process during the film, but I've heard that he was he worked with like a lot of Black organizations to make sure this was like an authentic portrayal. Blah blah blah. But yeah, he obviously ended up with Judy Garland, and they gave us the wonderful Liza Minnelli. And he had directed Judy Garland in like musical scenes before, but I think this was his first, full feature. And then I guess actually, yeah, another connection to 1944. He turned around and did Meet Me in St. Louis with Judy Garland in 1944, which is another one of my favorite movies. So,
which we'll probably cover on the show, I'm assuming. I think it's a pretty big movie for 44.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I guess like the last little things I want to point out, Eddie Rochester Anderson's performance. I love like just his comedic performance. His comedic abilities are great. There's one part that always makes me laugh out loud. It's where Ethel is like touching his dead kind of body, and then you see little Joe's actual like spirit, but his body, watching all of this occur. And Petunia like grabs his body's hands, and she says, "Your hands are cold." And he's like, "Of course they is. I'm dead." And I just love that line. Like it's the way he delivers it is so absolutely perfect. And then the last little thing I want to say about his character is I'm always like super interested in how people view his character, because there's always a lot of talk, at least in like the things I've read, about how in this film he is almost kind of like a child. Like his name is Little Joe. Just physically he's smaller than Petunia. There's scenes where he's in bed and she has to take care of him like he's a child, and he just has this very like goofy childlike way about him. And it's led to some interesting conversations that I've been a part of on whether or not this was like emasculating to him or like infantilizing
Mm.
his character. I just think that's always an interesting conversation, especially like when I did this presentation about this film several years ago. There were a lot of like Black people in the audience, and they had thoughts on whether this was, kind of like offensive to Black men. So that was just an interesting conversation that I always like to bring up. I don't, necessarily have anything else to add. But if y'all do, I know Glenn, you said something that you want to follow up with.
I don't know if I necessarily have that much to add to that. I mean, there is this when like initially part of the like the prayer that Ethel makes that gets forces of the afterlife to kind of make this deal. She starts it by basically praying to God and saying like, I know that Joe is dumb, but like I love him and he means well. And it's like, but she has to like put a disclaimer on it. Like, look, I get it. Like Joe, not the brightest bulb, but like, come on, like look at this guy. What's he gonna do?
He's such a little cutie.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like he's a little kid.
Which, yeah, I mean, I could definitely see the argument that it is infantilizing towards that character. I mean, even just calling him Little Joe throughout the movie is like, yeah, he's short, but like, I don't know if that's the nicest nickname to give him. I didn't really think that, but I'm now curious to like read that perspective on it.
I think that like it kind of works in a way because he is it through the movie. It's a lot of him not really being capable of making his own decisions. Like he is being brought back and forth by people who kind of have more power in his life than him, either his wife or the angels and devils on his shoulder. It's like you it puts you in a situation where you can feel worse about the peril of him going to hell, right? It makes him feel more innocent because like he is not like an unrepentant gambler. He just like can't control himself because he acts like a child. And when
Also, his
he
friends that are
like
gamblers like physically drag him there.
right.
Like, he tries to get away and they pull him away. So, yeah.
But like and then like in the movie he is kind of like a vessel for the influence of these like what you were calling like these sort of parental style figures of the angels and devils. So I don't know, like yeah, I guess there are ways that like it may be kind of insulting to him, but I also think maybe it kind of makes the movie work a little better because you can kind of get on board with his situation more. You don't have like any kind of like it doesn't have to grapple with him being a truly bad person because he's innocent enough the whole time because he's a cutie that like he that he never is actually like bad in the movie.
Yeah, he's no Uncle Charlie.
Yeah. Say that again.
Hey, nice way to wrap it up.
I tried. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I have anything else to mention. I probably do, but I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in this film. So
Yeah.
Thanks, Ambriehl, for joining. She'll be back on for the send off at the end. What's a good movie to come off of Cabin in the Sky?
That is a good question. I guess we did watch another movie that could be considered a comedy, which is The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp.
Yes, the most British movie that we've ever seen.
The most British thing that I think exists, which is also, I mean, somewhat intentional. Like this movie is about like Britain and like the British, the heart of like Britishness. So
right,
yeah,
it's kind of simultaneously mourning the end of the kind of classic genteel Britishness and also saying we're fighting the Nazis now. We need to get gritty.
Yeah, get over it.
Yeah,
a little bit. This is a directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger.
Our first,
collectively known as the Archers. Yeah, our first on the show, and also the first one that I have seen ever, just in life. I've never seen any of their other movies.
Oh, I can't wait till you see Red Shoes. Oi.
Same. I'm very excited to like get more into their catalog. This is not their first movie. I think this is like their fourth or fifth movie, but the first one that we're covering on the show. And yeah, I think from what my sort of cultural osmosis knowledge of Powell Pressburger movies are like, this fits the bill. It's a like very colorful technicolor sort of, I don't know if I'd necessarily call it an epic, but it's a big movie. And
This
it's like you feel it.
Yeah, I think that like, the Technicolor I think is a good place to start with this because not a lot of movies have that kind of lush three strip Technicolor thing going on, right? And like
Hmm.
it's an extra expense to the production. I think it's kind of interesting like what movies they feel like are appropriate to do in three strip Technicolor and also like what having Technicolor does for a movie.
Hmm.
This movie starts off in like straight up current day. Like there are people riding motorcycles. And it was kind of shocking to see because I'm so used to the Technicolor movies that we've seen so far being like this like fantasy or like it's like a
Hmm.
painterly vision of like a rosy past. And it was just so weird watching like motorcycles in Technicolor. It made it look like a 60s movie. Like the very beginning of it had that feeling.
Almost the entire movie, actually. I felt like if you told me this movie was released in like 1961, I
Yeah.
might have believed you, because
Yeah.
it feels much more. It feels much newer than I think most. I mean, just being in color at all adds a lot to that. But I think also just like the kind of scope of it,
Hmm.
and it's like the specific type of Technicolor too. Like, right, there is this kind of ephemeral thing to three strip Technicolor that's like people have tried to kind of recapture, and it's very difficult. Like no one actually knows the actual like the chemical mix that they used, and so even if you were to shoot on like the same kind of film stock, which also doesn't exist anymore, like people keep trying to like recreate, in particular, Powell Pressburger movies Technicolor,
Wow.
and they can't do it. They don't know what they did to the film
Oh man.
to make them look like this.
Yeah, that's crazy. I really, if I ever make a movie, which probably won't happen, I would want to make it in like a look, the kind of radiant three strip Technicolor
Mm,
look.
yeah.
But I was thinking like, while I was in that modern day sequence, and I was thinking about like the kind of jarring aspect of seeing a Technicolor movie this way, like I was like, this is the only like not fantasy contemporary three strip we've seen, but like, um, like what's it like another? And is it the case that there's almost something kind of romantic about three strip Technicolor, right? It's like fantasy. It's the Wizard of Oz. It's Gone with the Wind. And I was thinking, like, Gone with the Wind is not fantasy, but it uses these like hyper real colors, and it's like
It kind of is,
romanticizing.
though.
Well, yeah, but it's like romanticizing this time, right? It is using the
Hmm.
three strip
Yeah.
to like feed into the romance of longing for this era that is lost. And that's the same thing that's going on in this movie. It is kind of a
Yeah.
British Gone with the Wind. It's got like a similar kind of
Mm.
many years long scope. It's about a similar kind of idea of like, here's the honorable way that we used to be that doesn't exist anymore. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
and so in that way, like, even though Gone with the Wind did not go up to current day, it stayed completely in the past. This one has like a framing device of being contemporary, but most of the movie is set in older, better times,
Yeah.
a more civilized age.
I do think this movie is at least slightly more kind of critical of the
Yeah,
past and of like old ways of thinking than Gone with
yeah,
the Wind is. But yeah, it's true. It does have really, right, all of the like kind of big Technicolor movies that we watched are very romantic in the kind of like poetic sense, right? Where
yeah, yeah,
they're about these sort of like idealistic characters or times or stories. And yeah, I think this movie is almost kind of trying to, not deconstruct is maybe taking it a bit too far, but it at least is trying to, I guess, yeah, somewhat kind of deconstruct a lot of sort of things that are ingrained into British culture in the 1940s, or like in the early 20th century. Yeah, it simultaneously does feel kind of celebratory and self-critical.
It definitely does both of those things. I remembered to make a synopsis for the other ones, and I forgot to
Yes.
for this. No, I forgot to for this one.
Ah,
But I guess we
this
should.
one's easy to synopse, I guess.
Yeah, there is a man named Clive Wynne Candy, and
Oh yeah,
he
there is no character named Colonel Blimp in this film.
there is no character named Colonel Blimp. He kind of represents the Blimp, the
Hmm.
platonic Blimp. Uh, but there's a guy named Candy. He starts off as kind of like a headstrong, younger person in the military in during the Boer War. He has ideals and he believes in them, and he'll break with his superiors in order to follow those ideals, uh, and that kind of gets him in trouble. He ends up having to do a duel, and the person because he insults a German officer, I think,
Hmm.
and somebody else from the German military is kind of randomly assigned to fight him. It's a duel with sabers, and they injure each other, but then while they're healing, they become friends. Candy is in Germany with this lady, and the German falls in love with the lady, and the German, he's a main character, so I should say what his name is.
Well, he's got a heck of a name.
Yes, they mentioned that in it's like we've only ever met,
Yeah.
you only ever meet one guy named Theo Kretschmar Schuldorf, uh, but and the lady is Edith. The two of them fall in love. You kind of expect Candy and the lady to fall in love, but he's like, "No, great, go ahead. I'm gonna go back to England now." And then as soon as he goes back to England, he realizes that he was in love with the lady, and then Vertigo style attempts to like recreate her in every relationship that he has, and she's played by the
Yeah.
same person in the next couple
Yeah.
people that he is involved with. But then the movie kind of keeps moving through forward various points in time to him during the First World War, and he's a brigadier general, and then the Second World War, where he has kind of becoming outmoded. The framing device is a bunch of them doing a mock kind of military exercise. He's kind of getting ambushed and overwhelmed by the new people's ways. And the movie concludes with them sort of realizing that this sort of genteel older way that Blimp believes in doing things is outmoded in the face of the horrific Nazis.
Yeah, Candy is definitely presented as a guy who like really strongly believes in the idea of like honorable warfare and sort
Hmm.
of like the gentleman's agreement almost of right, because it's like at the beginning of the movie, right, he's like doing duels and stuff. All these there are all these rules, and by the end of the movie, they're like, no, like it's war. Like who gives a shit about any of this? Like the enemy certainly doesn't. So like we're getting our asses handed to us.
If
We
they're
gotta
willing to break the rules, then the rules don't mean anything anymore.
right. I've never fought in a war, but I my general thought on it is like there's no such thing as honorable warfare. Like when you're killing people, it's not like honor doesn't really factor into it. I think that it's nice to have ideals, and like war crimes are bad and people shouldn't do them. But I think especially like Candy's particular sort of like idealistic view of war is very much based on this like 19th century kind of mindset, that I think World War One kind of shattered for a lot of people and a lot of the world of this, that like a war could be as horrific as that.
Yeah.
um and so we kind of start to see his, not really disillusionment, because he really tries to stick to his guns, and it's pretty much everyone else who's like, Candy, like you have to, like things aren't like they used to be. You
Yeah.
gotta, you gotta get out of this mindset. This movie's like politics, I guess, I think are maybe a little bit off. I mean, right, because it's the earliest section of the movie when he's like at his youngest is he is a soldier in the Second Boer War in South Africa, which was horrible.
Yeah,
Like
that's the
the
thing.
British
It's a,
Army did so many war crimes, and the term concentration camp was invented to refer to the camps that the British set up in the Boer War,
yeah, and you know,
which
like
is mentioned in this movie. But I
not
feel like
like
they,
too different from Gone with the Wind in that this movie like is sort of denying the war
yeah,
crimes that the British did. Like that's what he gets into the fight over, is that he was
right,
is that the British were criticized for the way that they handled the Boer War, and he was like, "No, you can't do that, sir."
yeah. And it's like, well, I mean, I think even like in the 1940s, people knew that like there was a lot of war crimes happening in the Boer War. I do think this movie at least is very vague about it
Hmm.
at best. Right, at worst, it is sort of like denying that it happened. But so that I think that almost immediately kind of like put a bad taste in my mouth too, because that's like the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
There were a number of things that kind of gave me a bad taste in this movie, but there's also a lot of things that I really like about it. So kind of overall, I'm pretty positive on it. But
Hmm.
but I at least like that it is grappling with like big ideas that feel very sort of like kind of much like Casablanca, sort of feel very not ripped in the headlines, but very timely for when this movie was coming out. Like
Yeah.
um, it's very much about like the current moment in Britain and like how people are kind of responding to it.
Right. Yeah. I wonder if there was, you know, maybe a sizable contingent of people in England who, like, this movie is basically saying, like, the way that we used to do things was nice, but there are Nazis now. Like, we need to change our ways. And
Hmm.
it's making like a kind of, you know, it's not even like using like a metaphor to say that. Like, I think a movie nowadays
It's
might, like, it
having
is
characters say that.
yeah, it is just like, you know, it's not like Cabaret or Sound of Music or something like that, or another musical where like things are happy and then Nazis happen, right? Like and it's all in the past, and it's like a kind of parable about what could happen in the future. This is like, no, this is happening right now. Like this is
Hmm.
like we have gone from the late 1800s to right now, and we are in a different time. The Nazis are at our doors currently. We need to destroy them, basically.
Hmm. And like kind of the character that this viewpoint is like given to, the sort of mouthpiece for it, is Schuldorf, the German character,
Yeah.
who is like they fought in the duel and they became friends, and then after World War One, they meet up again in a British prison of war camp, and Schuldorf is like snubbing him basically, like it won't look at him, won't talk to him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emphasis on just like the great shame that he feels as like Germany as a defeated nation.
Hmm. It's definitely like the narrative of, you know, post World War One Germany of like,
Hmm.
you know, you're not treating us right, and because you're not treating us right, now we're gonna do another one, basically.
But right, and it's like Schuldorf really kind of comes around on that. It's like this is like who cares? Like there's when initially after World War One, right? He has this thing of like I could never feel proud again because like I was a soldier in an army that was defeated, and that is like the greatest shame possible.
Hmm.
And then I feel like after a number of years, Schuldorf was like, no, this is like the people in my life are the most important thing. I'm pushing them away. And I think Schuldorf really has, I think after the Nazis take over, has like it's kind of off screen, but through his dialogue, you really kind of see that he has put a lot of his previous ideas of kind of military rules and honor and things like that behind him, and he's like, no, this is this is horrific.
Yeah, I think what this movie is doing, like in him, is basically making a case for like doing the right thing, the thing that is like morally right, matters more, is not related to the thing that is called for by honor and manners and that kind of thing. And like it
Mm-hmm.
is more important to do the thing that is morally right. And you know, like you're saying, like there's a part where Schuldorf is basically where Schuldorf, it's kind of heartbreaking. He says like his sons have become Nazis,
Hmm.
and like he can't he he couldn't get through to them, and the only thing that he can do is fight against the Nazis, and you could see like the heartbreak in him when he
Yeah.
has to leave Germany and his children because they have become lost.
Yeah, Anton Walbrook is the actor who plays Schuldorf, and he's so good. And there's the scene right where he's like applying to immigrate to England, and they're like, "You're German. We're real suspicious about you." And he gives this like long monologue, pretty much, of just sort of like his like failure as a father to his sons who have become Nazis, and how he's just like there's nothing left for him in his country that he's like dedicated so much of his life to like protecting, and now he's just like,
Hmm.
no, it's all ruined, which is a very uncomfortable thing to feel as an American right now. um a lot of parallels there, but like it's like the back half of the movie I think really turned me around on it, when it like really kind of gets into these bigger ideas a lot more, and it's a bit
Hmm.
less of a like it's a bit less of a sort of like romp about
Romp, yeah.
soldiers, and it becomes a bit more movie about like big ideas. Yeah, there's not to say there isn't fun stuff during the romp section of the
The romp
movie.
section is fun. It's there's a lot of, that's the most British part. That's the part where they're really just getting to go, I say, old girl. And
Well, that too, like that's a big part of the Britishness, is just like Candy is like Britain personified into a person, right? On purpose. Like I think that's the intent. But
right.
it's like he's got his big mustache to hide his dueling scar. There's also a lot of talk about how like German soldiers like love dueling scars, and they like show them off whenever possible, and they're like, you're not a real soldier unless you have a dueling scar. And he's like, no, I have a dueling scar on my face. I'm growing a mustache to cover it up.
Which you know, he's I don't think this is actually intentional, but like he's got maybe his upper lip is not so stiff anymore.
Oh. But yeah, just like the dialogue, like the accents. There's so much sort of like very very heavy British speech
Yeah.
in this too.
They do the in my eyes cardinal sin of movies set in an earlier time, which is they go, Conan Doyle, never heard of him. I
Although at that point, like he was very famous, so it's more just like that character doesn't know who he is.
yeah. Right, he's a, yeah, the character knows all about Sherlock Holmes. Like again, like this super, you know, patriotism, nationalism, whatever you call it. It's just like we're the ones who have Sherlock Holmes. You know, he the guy who hasn't heard
Heard
of
of him?
the guy who hasn't heard of Arthur Conan Doyle has read every Sherlock Holmes story, and then they just
Which you
have like
think he
a,
would have looked at the byline at some point, but whatever.
I don't know, people you walk out for the credits. You know, I don't know who the key grip
Right.
was.
What else is there to talk about? There is a big sort of like taxidermy montage, which is another thing that I found distasteful about this movie.
I thought it was like a pretty slick like editing thing that they did because
Sure, but then it's also there's like rhinos and elephants in there. And it's like we have like there were like 4 rhinos left, and I'm just like I hate this so much. It's like it's because of people like Candy that there are 4 rhinos left. You know?
but it is to show the passage of time, like in one of the time skips in the movie, and so it's showing his kind of the results of his various hunting trips, and it has like a little date on a little plate under the head, and so you see them like
Yeah.
pop into existence on his wall to show like 20 years passing by or something. I thought is a pretty neat thing to do.
Is good ending trick, but I also just like ugh, gross. I do like or I don't know, maybe like the wrong word, but he gets this fancy apartment in London with his wife, who is played by Deborah Kerr, who also plays Edith and also plays later his driver. And they're like, "Oh man, what a nice apartment we have. Like this apartment's gonna last forever." And I was like, that apartment is gonna get blown up in the Blitz for sure, 100%. And I was right.
Yeah, speaking also of like his wife, I wasn't really sure what to make of what they were doing with that. Like it doesn't seem kind of related to the main idea of the movie, but there is this whole thing of it's like he had his love that he lost and he is desperately trying to replace her. I mean, it is kind of like him desperately trying to cling on to the way that things were.
Right.
But
It's
like
his stubbornness and his sort of like single-minded. He's like, "No, I found one woman who I find attractive and I will only ever pursue women who look exactly like her."
yeah, and are the same age as her too. I it's like it's like yeah, gender politics wise, it's a little it's weird, and I feel like it is like you know it really does remind me of Vertigo, right? But Vertigo is like critical of what is happening
Yeah.
there,
Vertigo was like, "This is pretty creepy, huh?"
and yeah, there's a part I don't know if this was intentional, maybe, but it's like there's a part where I think we're showing his German friend Theo. He's showing him like painting of his wife, and he has it on the wall next to all of his animal head trophies. Like he is like, here's another trophy. It's
Mhm.
uh, it's yeah, it's weird, and it's like yeah, it's like as he gets older, he's still dating women the same age because when he's in his 70s, he's still like, "Hey, remember that one girl that I?"
The third woman played by Deborah Kerr, I don't think there is at least any intentional kind of like romantic connection between those two. It's
Hmm.
more that he just likes keeping her around because she looks like his dead wife and woman that he was in love with when he was younger.
But that's the thing. It's like I don't
Which
know
is
if he
still
ever.
weird and creepy, but like I don't get the sense that he is sort of like romantically pursuing her anyway.
It doesn't really even feel like he loved his dead wife, though. Like
Right.
he just wanted to replace the woman that he lost, including the day that he gets home, he dates her sister, and then he's just
Right.
like, "It's
Right.
not the same."
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the few scenes we see of their marriage does seem to be relative seems pretty happy. Like I feel like there aren't really any scenes of them fighting or like not getting along or
Yeah,
it being uncomfortable or weird. It seems like the movie is telling us as an audience like no, they had a like traditional happy marriage.
right.
But it is like this thing that yeah, he just like can't let go of much like his I guess his sense of duty and of honor and such, which I think is what led to him telling Schuldorf to go for it also is because he felt a sort of I don't know obligation or sort of he was honor bound like not to get in the way of their romance.
Hmm. Speaking of honor,
Yeah, good honor and also interesting scenes of time passing.
and also, wait, there aren't swords in this movie? Is there a sword in this movie, or am I
There
just
might
thinking
be a
of
sword
every
like in the
other
background.
Kurosawa movie?
Yeah, I think you are. Yeah, this is a really sword free film.
I rate it 0 swords out of 5. This is Sanshiro Sugata, aka Judo Saga, I guess, is an alternate title, but it is about a guy named Sanshiro Sugata who goes to this. He wants to learn. It's about like the kind of conflict between judo and jujitsu, I guess. I don't really know about the history of jujitsu. Maybe it's like some kind of like offshoot of judo. But anyway,
Well, I believe jujitsu came first. Judo, I realized after watching this movie, was only invented in the 1800s. I thought it was
okay.
a much older martial art than that.
I guess I'm getting that backwards.
I mean, the most notable thing about this movie is that it is Akira Kurosawa, and it's his first film as director, which
Right. I was
is a
trying. I
big
was
deal.
trying to do a synopsis, but I stopped like
Um,
half a sentence in. um.
Akira Kurosawa, who, for my money, probably one of the best directors ever, just of any of them.
Yeah.
And this movie, not up to the level of his later work, but still pretty good. This feels like a Kurosawa movie, even if it is maybe the stakes are a little bit lower. I mean, are they even lower? There's still life and death in this movie, but it's about like a judo tournament or judo versus jujitsu, which I also think like this is kind of a martial arts movie, but it's kind of funny that it's a martial arts movie about judo, which is like the,
Kind of
the
a
most like defensive martial art, right? It's all like blocks and throws and trips and stuff.
right, except that the throws get real violent in this movie.
Very true. Yeah.
It
The
is
throws go hard.
yeah, like so Sanshiro, it like he wants to become like, a good fighter. He is too headstrong and it kind of acts all cocky and starts beating people up when he's drunk in the street, and then his master is like, don't do that. You're very good at what you do, but you don't have the right discipline to do it right, and you better watch yourself, kid. And then he tries to show his resolve by sitting. He's like, I'm gonna kill myself. I'll show you how serious I am about what I'm doing. And then he jumps into a lake. The master goes like, fine, do it. And then he jumps into a lake and just hangs
It's like,
onto
all right, go ahead.
he hangs onto a stick, like almost at the precipice of it, but then he just like hangs there for an entire day, and then sort of like looks at a lotus flower in the lake and has like a sort of mental breakthrough, and then he becomes the proper judo or jujitsu guy, and then he kind of just fights some fights, and that's the story of this.
There's the whole tournament thing. There's all the drama with the woman and her dad, and he like doesn't want to fight because he's like, no, like she's so like invested in her dad winning this thing, like I can't take that away from them.
Yeah.
And then there's like the fancy suit wearing jujitsu guy who's real upset that he's so good at judo.
That guy is a
And
vibe.
challenges him to a fight to the death. And we get our big sort of like Kurosawa final fight in the windswept fields.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, once again, like, yeah, the Kurosawa is immediately making a Kurosawa movie. Like, this is not
Right.
like the and I think there are parts of this that, like you're saying, are not quite as refined as something like Seven Samurai, but like it's pretty well refined for a first
I was
movie.
surprised at how many of the kind of what I consider to be like Kurosawa staples are in this movie. Like it's high stakes, right? It's like by the end of the movie, it's like one of these guys is gonna die. It's about like fighting, right? Like a lot of Kurosawa movies have, fights or sort of, they're war movies, they're crime movies, they're action movies. And also just like it's the filmmaking of it is like it uses a lot of, I don't know, it's like the editing is really good. The like use of weather is a thing that I associate a lot with Kurosawa movies, of like how much like weather plays into different scenes.
We need 4DX Seven Samurai.
Yes, it's how much kind of like stillness there is in this movie, and how like stillness is portrayed.
I think honestly that is like one of the things that like works so well right out of the box with this movie, is like the way that he is able to just build tension in these moments of stillness that just explode into motion.
Yeah. And then slow motion also, a thing that I associate with a lot of later Kurosawa stuff, is also used in this in kind of similar effect. There's so right, we were saying how in Colonel Blimp they use the sort of like hunting trophies as like a way to show the passage of time. There's a great scene in this that shows the passage of time just by showing a lost sandal getting sort of like kicked around and sort of like going through different weather and like in different places. Like it's stuck up on a fence, and then it's floating down a river, and then it's like in the mud, and that's just there to show like time passing. And it's just such a great, simple, effective, creative use of like filmmaking, just to be like, here's time passing, but it's interesting. It's like you're watching the journey of this sandal.
Yeah, it's unique, certainly.
Yeah. As opposed to just having, a title card comes up that says, 6 months later. Boring. Something else about this movie is that it is partially lost. There's like 2 or 3 scenes that were lost at some point between 1943 and the 1952 re-release, which is sort of the version of it that still exists.
Yeah, and I mean, well, this was a movie being made in wartime Japan, and so like this stuff was
Yeah.
censored, I believe. Like the things that were taken out might have had to do with stuff that the the emperor and his crew did not like.
Yeah, I did think about that while watching this movie too, because I mean, even like I think some of the other early Japanese movies that we watched were still being made while Japan was like at war in China and things like that. So it's like people making movies in Japan. It is weird just to see how like sort of calm a lot of those like 30s Japanese movies are.
Hmm.
And then this too is like they're in the middle of a war, and it's like Kurosawa is just like, I'm just gonna make a judo nice little judo movie, which I guess there was like oversight in terms of like what kind of stories I guess they were allowed to make movies of.
Right. I mean, I think that like, if you want to make movies, they've got to be kind of apolitical. I mean, this is kind of
Hmm.
touching on my senior thesis a little bit, but it's kind of like with Zhang Yimou in China, where like he used to make these really political movies and they got banned the second they were released. And he's like, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm gonna make kung fu movies now. and yeah, I mean, what is the kung fu movie if not the Chinese samurai movie?
Kind of. Also, this is a right. This is a period piece. This is set in the 1800s. That I think also that contributed to like the Japanese government at the time being like, no, it's okay. It's like it's olden times. We're fine with stories about olden times.
That's the same thing that happened to that last Japanese movie we watched, right? What was
Yeah,
that? What was
I
that
remember.
one?
I remember that one was the story of the last chrysanthemum.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's like period pieces. They were cool with like that. Which era of Japan is that called?
Was it Meiji?
Like
I think. I don't
late
know.
late 1800s. I don't remember. Yell at us in the comments. But yeah, it is kind of just a little wild just to think about like this being made. When it was being made, I guess. And it doesn't really seem like it. I mean, who knows what it was allowed to. Maybe the scenes that are missing were maybe a little bit more topical or hot button. Who knows?
Hmm.
It doesn't feel like Imperial Japan is really playing any part in like the storytelling of this movie. It doesn't seem like this movie has anything to say about like the national character, or the way in which like Colonel Blimp is so much about like Britain during wartime, and this movie is like completely disconnected from that,
Yeah.
probably by necessity, but
This
like
this movie is kind of about, as far as like what it is kind of telling you about like morals and like the person you ought to be. It's kind of pretty, it feels like pretty typical Japanese stuff of, or at least like historical Japanese stuff of
mhm,
like these are the ways that you be a good person.
mhm,
These are the ways that you act rightly, such as don't get too cocky and listen to what your
mhm.
judo master tells you to do. Yeah. This movie has a couple of really fun people in it. One of them is Takashi
Mhm.
Shimamura, who
Yeah.
is my favorite guy. Like kind of. I mean,
I mean, he's pretty great.
he's pretty great. He's the sort of main samurai in Seven Samurai, and just this cuddly old man who will also cut you in half. And
He's the lead in Akiru, right? Which I haven't seen.
and he's also in Godzilla.
Yeah. So he is sort of like, 20th century Japan. He is like he's in all the like the big stuff. It
I
seems
just
like.
love his vibe too.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, it's like I look forward to seeing many more movies starring this guy, because yeah, always a delight.
But soon we'll be getting to probably number one Japanese star of all time, Toshiro Mifune. Gotta love him.
Star of 1941.
What?
The Spielberg movie. Star of the worst Spielberg movie, 1941.
Oh, is he in that?
He is in that
Oh
for
wow.
some reason. Probably because Spielberg was like, I love Toshiro Mifune, I want to put him in a movie. And then it's like, here, you can be in my worst movie.
Is it worse than BFG?
I'm sure. I think so, yeah.
Wow.
And I haven't seen Always, so, jury's still out on that one, I guess. That one I know is also not considered one of his best, but I haven't seen it.
There's also a character called Momma. I mean, I think I think his name is like Momma or something, but in the subtitles, it's
in English subtitles. It is just Momma. Did confuse me for a second.
Sanshiro gets it in his first tournament fight. He fights Momma and then just yeets him straight into the wall so hard that he dies. And then everybody screams. It's kind of hardcore.
Yeah. I don't think of judo as a lethal form of fighting. But I guess you throw someone hard enough into the wall, they die.
And then my only other note from this movie, well, two. There's a point where someone's ashing a cigarette into a flower, which is a very cool image.
Yes. Well, it's a great villain move.
Yes. Yeah, the big
because it's
big bad villain does that.
Yeah. Which is I almost kind of feel like I want to steal that because that's such a villain move to be like, not only are you smoking and ashing your cigarette, you're doing it into a flower. It's it's so loaded,
Yeah, especially because a flower is sort of in this movie the thing that takes the kind of rougher around the edges, not good Sanshiro and turns him into the proper person. Mm-hmm. And then also there's a point where someone is in pain and they go, here, have some opium to take the edge off.
I think I missed that part.
Unless he was just smoking something. It looked like an opium pipe.
It probably was. There was also right before the sort of duel to the death at the end. There's other guy who's sort of, I don't know, not officiating. I don't know what that's called, but he's like, I just want to say, for the record, dying is bad. You guys don't have to fight to the death. Just throwing that out there. Which I feel like is worth pointing out.
Well, on to our final movie.
And what a film this one is.
It's the first entry into Universal's dark universe. It's Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
What? Frankenstein and the Wolfman in one movie? What is this? Some kind of dark universe?
What is this, a crossover episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of this movie's quality, which I guess we'll get into, I do think this movie is significant and that it is taking characters from separate movies and having them cross over, which Universal did a bunch of times. This is the first one of their what are they called, Monster Mash movies, Monster Fest movies. I forget what they called them at the time. But it is that thing is so ubiquitous now. Right? I mean, Marvel really kind of broke the seal on it, and they're just like, okay, now every movie has to be 8 movies, and all of the characters cross over.
Right.
Which then Universal tried to do again, following that lead, and people were immediately like, no, this sucks.
You're talking circa 2015, right?
Yeah, well, 2017 with the Tom Cruise Mummy movie, which is pretty terrible. And I mean, that movie feels like the whole movie is like a trailer. It only exists to cross over with other things, and it's just boring and not good. This movie feels like it's kind of just why not?
Yeah,
you get all these monsters. Why not? And there is even though I don't think it really quite makes good on the premise of Frankenstein meeting the Wolfman. It's also funny that's not versus the Wolfman. It's just they meet. Which, again, is kind of the movie. It's technically they meet.
They become fast friends.
So, the first, I would say, almost half of this movie is just The Wolfman 2. It's just a pretty much straightforward sequel to The Wolfman.
I mean, there was a Wolfman movie in between The Wolfman and this, but...
Wait, what?
Yes.
Which one was that?
I think so. It was let me double check on that.
Because there were... I was trying to figure out the timeline because we did skip some Universal monster movies, and there were 2 Frankenstein movies between Bride and this.
Oh, you know what? That's right. Sorry, I'm thinking about the intermediate Frankenstein movies. Oh, yes,
there were multiple Frankenstein movies ahead, but then this sort of starts as just a sequel to The Wolfman. He dies at the end of the Wolfman, but then in this, it's sort of like, well, if the moon hits him when he's dead, he comes back alive.
Well, there's some grave robbers come and they take the wolf's bane out of his grave,
Mm,
out of his casket, and that is what wakes him back up again, or it stops him from. It's the force field that stops him from coming back alive again. And so he wakes back up and then he continues to be a werewolf. And then he goes, oh no, not this again. And like, I guess I can't die. And so this movie is just like the main plot of this movie is the Wolfman going like, I need to figure out how to die. Like, I'm going to go on a
yeah,
quest to kill myself, which is a
yeah,
wild hook for a movie.
it really is. But then, like halfway through, there is a level of kind of like gut excitement I get when it's just like it's been this Wolfman movie, and then he's like, right, he meets up with this Roma woman who I think might have been in the first Wolfman
Yeah,
movie.
she's the same
Right,
person
it's
from
like
the first
it's
one.
right, it's the mother of Bela Lugosi's character. Bela Lugosi playing in that movie the werewolf who bites Larry Talbot. Bela Lugosi's also in this movie playing the Frankenstein monster, which I think Lon Chaney Jr. played the Frankenstein monster in the previous one to this, but then
Yeah.
they were like, "Well, you can't be both." And Dracula's not in this one, so Bela Lugosi was free to play a different character, I guess.
Yeah, and
Um,
Frankenstein originally talked in this one like he does in Bride of Frankenstein, but people in test screenings, people laughed at Bela Lugosi's voice,
right.
and so they cut it out.
So now, right, it's like the monster is back to just grunting.
Yeah.
I will say, like, as I think Bela Lugosi is very good in the 1931 Dracula movie, which I don't think is very. I don't think that movie is very good, but I think Bela Lugosi is very good in it. He's very bad as the Frankenstein monster in this. I think
Yeah.
he's very, very bad at it. I don't think they should have cast him.
This is interesting too in a way because I guess we haven't seen the Lon Chaney Frankenstein, but it's interesting how they have so like boiled down the essence visually of what Frankenstein's monster in parentheses
Hmm.
what the monster is, that it's just like you can slap that costume on
It can kind
anybody.
of be anybody, right?
Right.
Like you put a square head and like a dark suit on him and like the bolts and everything, and it's like good, done. No more work needed.
Yeah, and so it's like Frankenstein has stopped being just the original guy,
Boris Karloff.
Boris Karloff, right? Like it was like so associated with him, but they've like taken they've turned him into like the iconic like aspects that which I
Yeah.
think is kind of interesting. Like only this many years later, it's like he's so recognizable in like those little traits that you can. But yeah, but also like Bela Lugosi's head is such a different shape from Boris Karloff's head that I think
Right.
it kind of
Yeah.
like really ruins it.
Yeah, no, he's just kind of stumbling around. He's got his arms out. He's kind of it feels like he's doing an impression
Exactly.
of Frankenstein.
Yeah. Impression is the word. I think that's sort of what I meant.
It's
Is
like Bela Lugosi in a like Halloween costume, going "Arr, rawr," and I'm like, no, no, sir, I don't buy any of this.
there's a part where Lon Chaney, as the Wolfman, is asking where Frankenstein's records are kept, and like, and then the monster is without speaking, but he's like, "Grr, this where records kept."
Yeah, I don't think this movie is very good, but I enjoyed myself as best I could, I think.
Yeah, this movie's camp, and it's not like the dialogue
Yeah, but it's
is
not like good camp like Bride of Frankenstein is.
it's not intentional camp like Bride of Frankenstein is. I
Mm,
think that's the difference.
mm,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that I don't think this is a good movie, but I think that it is a great watch as a B movie. Like this is a really like solid B movie where like the acting is really bad, the script is really bad, like dumb stuff is happening, but you're just like I'm having fun. Like, the
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I
it's
don't know. I think the bar was set so high with like Bride of Frankenstein as for like these Universal monster movies that like that one's super fun also, but it's also just a genuinely good movie. And so now when I'm
Yeah.
watching the other ones, I'm just kind of like, oh well, these really have kind of lost a lot of their luster to me. I mean, this movie is just it's so sweaty. It's so just like Wolfman, what he died. How are we gonna bring him back? I don't know. The fucking moonlight hits him and he wakes up again. It's like it feels like it was written the day before
Yeah.
they started filming.
That's why it feels like a B movie. It feels like I'm
Right.
like
And it's like I think once you get into that rhythm watching
yeah.
it, it's a lot more enjoyable because there's also things right like the movie starts in Cardiff in Wales is where Larry Talbot wakes up like at the hospital. And then he proceeds to get on like a horse-drawn cart and travel to Germany question mark like the Bavarian Alps.
Right.
But like did he take that across the English Channel? What happened there? My personal headcanon is that there is actually a weird Bavarian enclave in Wales somewhere,
Oh, that'd be
and
good.
that's where Frankenstein's old laboratory is. Also, having skipped two of the Frankenstein movies that are also, I think, pretty sweaty and like ridiculous, it's funny that there is well, I think the original Dr. Frankenstein's granddaughter in this movie, which really starts to question how much time has passed between that movie and
Right.
this one. Because I think there's like Son of Frankenstein is one of the movies, does not appear in this one. Then there's Ghost of Frankenstein. That's the one with Lon Chaney playing the monster. I don't know if there's a lot of like crossover characters between these, but it's like the Frankenstein family tree at this point is just like whatever actor we have, like it's like Frankenstein's like third cousin's nephew is like, you're the new Dr. Frankenstein. Get over here. You're the Frankenstein for this movie. There's the like kindly doctor who's like at first is, trying to, he's like shooing the cops out of Larry Talbot's room. It's like, give him space. I need to help this man. And then halfway through, Larry Talbot is like, no, I need to kill myself. I'm a monster. And he's like, well, I can help you with that.
But also, and then there's a later point where because he's a doctor,
Goes mad with power immediately.
yeah, it's like
as soon as he like touches a Tesla coil, he's like, the power in my hands.
Yeah, it seems like this movie is saying that there's because okay, this is like kind of the dumbest, weakest part of this plot is that uh the reason why he like Wolfman thinks that Dr. Frankenstein's notes will be the way to learn how to kill himself is because Frankenstein learned the secret of life and death. And like
right,
which is such a
resurrecting dead people,
right, it's
not
like
how to kill a wolfman.
it's such a vague thing, but it's just like okay, like he tapped into some kind of like secret knowledge or whatever, and then this movie is saying like once you tap into that knowledge you basically just become Frankenstein, like you act like him
Right.
because the medical doctor did once he saw the secret of life and death, quote unquote.
The knowledge is simply too powerful. Right, and then there's like the weird thing where he's trying to like suck the life energy out of the Wolfman and put it into the Frankenstein monster or something, maybe.
It's just so much bullshit. Like that's why
it's a bunch of science gobbledygook bullshit. It's not even science, it's just like made up monster movie science, right? It's just like there's a single Tesla coil and like a control panel and they're just like science stuff. And then both the monsters break out of their, like slabs that they're on and they have a little fight. And then a dam explodes, and then the movie ends. Like they get flooded, and then there's immediately the end title card over like the flood destroying the castle they're in.
Yeah,
which I thought was very funny, but it ends so abruptly.
That's the thing. Like I it's just like perfect Mystery Science Theater fodder. This movie, like I really.
Sure.
I had a lot of fun with it on that basis. The line readings are so hammy. Like Dr. Frankenstein dead. It's but like
Linguo.
and this like so much of like what's going on in this movie doesn't make sense. Like the plot doesn't make sense. The mechanisms of things don't make sense. But you're just along for the ride. Like I think that like it also is like such a 180 from the original Frankenstein movie, and Bride, which is basically like critiquing mob justice, right? It's like the monster was not so much of a monster. He didn't know what he was doing, and he's actually like a little cutie pie in the second one. But like, it is mobs who
He
don't
just wants to smoke a cigar.
it's mobs who kill him. It's panicky people who don't understand things that aren't them, that want to kill him, and don't understand. Yeah, and like, so he finds like solace with the blind guy and their marginalization. And this movie, there's a whole big like, we don't trust what they're doing up in that Frankenstein's manor. Let's get a mob together over it, right? And so that's why the dam explodes, is because there's a guy who can't be talked down from his want to destroy anything that's different from him. So he blows up the dam, but the movie basically treats it as a triumph. It's like he did the right thing. Like, this movie is saying that mob justice is good, actually. It doesn't make any sense.
This movie is also right, like the main plot of this movie is like a man trying to like perform an assisted suicide. So it's like I do feel like it's thematically, this movie is a mess. I also like the angry mob thing.
Assisted suicide by way of energy transfer.
Yes. How else are you gonna do it?
You need to transfer out my life force so that I can die.
Yeah. Which is also funny, like, that is not what Frankenstein's experiments are about in the other movies either. So like, I don't know where he got those notes from. I like how it feels like almost as soon as Larry Talbot arrives in the village wherever it is, there is a like preformed angry mob like already there with torches. Pretty much like they've been sitting around like waiting for more monsters to show up. There's like a whole like musical interlude also
That was weird.
that feels kind of strange. That feels like someone at Universal was just like, hey, this guy can sing, put him in a movie. It's like, put him in that Frankenstein picture. Who cares? The movie feels like it was made at Universal kind of as an afterthought, almost, of just like, these movies make money, we're gonna just churn out more monster movies.
Yeah.
How can we do something different? Like, put a Wolfman in it. Sure, he's available.
Turns out the first multiverse movie was a lazy cash-in.
Who knew that the Dark Universe was actually always a bad idea?
I will say, like, this, unrelated, but like with Lon Chaney Jr. in this, he's so hateable in the first Wolfman movie. I
Right.
despise him in that. I think in this, he, maybe because there's no women around, like, he is he's a lot more sympathetic in this movie. I think true. Yeah. He does, like, something that I was noticing is that, like, he plays haunted very well. Like, he is really bummed out to be alive, and he really just wishes to not exist anymore, and so he just has this like defeat to him that it does feel, he sells it really well.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that in the first Wolfman, and that's sort of like his entire performance in this one is like haunted and sort of just like, I have no place in the world. The only thing I'm ever going to do is hurt people, which is like, when the movie gets close to actually sort of like being about that, it's kind of interesting. I mean, my favorite parts of the movie are kind of towards the beginning, when it is just kind of a straightforward like sequel to the Wolfman. I think there are some good like, there's the bit when he's in the hospital bed and he sees the moonlight like creeping towards him, like as the moon comes out from behind the clouds, that I think is really cool and well done. I'm like, would have been nice to have something that cool in the first Wolfman movie. But then he wolfs out, and it's just sort of like him like jumping around like on boxes on like a backlot street, and it's like, no attempt is made at like tension or scares ever in this movie.
Like, the Wolfman costume and the transformation look better in this movie than they did in the second movie, but they look better in this movie than they did in the first movie, but they're still not that good. I don't think the Wolfman looks interesting. Like, Frankenstein looks interesting, Dracula looks interesting, the Mummy looks interesting, Invisible Man looks interesting. Wolfman looks, it's his design is so boring to me. It's
I think he looks better in the first one because I think he's lit better in the first one. I think in the first one they do a lot of like dramatic lighting on him, and he's kind of hidden in fog and shadows a bit more.
yeah.
And in this one, it's more just like, here he is, Wolfman. And I think it really it emphasizes sort of the weaknesses in the design more. I think in this one,
Hmm.
even if like the makeup itself is maybe a little bit more polished in this one. I don't know. I think like the Mystery Science Theater thing is like that is the right approach to have with this one. Like this movie's very very dumb, and
Yeah.
and if you are on board with that, then it's fun.
I was surprisingly on board for it.
Yeah, I think I'm still just sort of like like these movies can be good. You know, like when James Whale is making them, these movies are really good.
Uh-huh.
And so for there to be like so many of them that feel like they're just kind of slapped together. I don't know, but like the sets in this, I think are very cool. There's like the big cemetery set in the beginning that looks great. There's a lot of cool, like very dramatic lighting in this. It's not really ever scary, but it has a lot of kind of gothic atmosphere that is fun,
Yeah.
I guess.
Oh, one more thing on the messy theming of this movie. I guess they're like updating the Germany to be like, modern day or whatever.
Right.
And so one like the cop in Germany looks like a Nazi, and so there's a scene where like a guy that looks like a
That's
Nazi
why I
is
don't think it's supposed to be Germany.
maybe not, yeah. But like there's a scene where he's like roughing up the Romani woman, and it's like, oh, they might not even be known like that there was like, like the
Right.
extent of like how real that was. But it feels pretty tasteless.
Yeah. And that is also like a weird thing, right? Because the first Frankenstein movie, or like the first couple, I think are supposed to be set in the Bavarian Alps, either in Germany or Switzerland. I know the book is set in Switzerland. I don't really think the movie is. Also, like every character in
Neutral.
this, like all the villagers have English accents, even though they're wearing like lederhosen. So it's like and then it's like they get there by cart, so it's like it's very vague. In my mind, I'm like, I really have no idea where this is supposed to take place. But it's also clearly supposed to be contemporary. It's like it's supposed to be the 1940s. But then it's like if they're in Europe, like mainland Europe, especially like near Germany, how would that work? And the movie just ignores all of it entirely, which is why I think it's still set in Wales. I think there's just this weird Bavarian like town that it takes place in. That's the only way it makes any sense.
This movie's just its whole MO is just like, don't think about it.
Yes, very much.
Reverse the polarity.
I wrote that down, reverse the polarity in my notes, because there's a thing where it's like we need to connect like the positive life energy to the negative life energy, and then it's like, no, we gotta switch it. And I'm like, yeah, reverse the polarity. That'll work. That makes sense. Movies that were coming out at the same time, the like Jacques Tourneur, Val Lewton movies, the RKA horror movies in 1943 are so much better than the Universal ones. It's like it's mind-boggling. It's funny, like the RKA ones are like very cheap and like genuinely very spooky and have like really good scares in them. And the Universal ones are like super expensive. They're just like monsters like throwing foam bricks around. And it's like, they have their own charm, I suppose. I don't want to feel like I'm being too harsh.
I'm way more comfortable being harsh on the first Wolfman movie. This one, I have a lot of good times watching crappy 50s B movies, and this feels like one of those.
Much like the Werewolf in London movie, the like 1930s werewolf movie, it's like by being dumber, it ends up kind of being better because you're not like the stuff the writing in it that doesn't work as well doesn't stick out as much because you're like, it's silly. There's like a Tesla coil in the background. It's fine.
Well, that about does it for this episode.
What we didn't talk about favorites.
Yeah. Glenn, what's your favorite?
Of the features, I have trouble deciding because I feel like all of them were like fine to good
Yeah.
in ways where I'm like, yeah, this is good. I feel like none of them were really a big standout. I think my favorite feature was probably Shadow of a Doubt. Although if we're going over the whole episode, everything we talked about, my favorite movie was for sure Red Hot Riding Hood. Like by a lot.
Oh yeah. We've done shorts for favorites before, I think.
All right, great. Then that's my favorite. That's my pick for
Yeah,
43.
Red Hot Riding Hood kind of has to win, doesn't it? I don't know.
It's like it's not even a question. Like
I don't know if you
the
can
best
get
one.
like as much distilled excellence in anywhere else in this episode.
Well, it's funny. I was saying earlier how it's like 43 doesn't feel like it has this sort of like, marquee movie the way that like the last couple of years have had, like Citizen Kane, like this incredible, big influential thing. Red Hot Riding Hood is kind of that for 43, I think.
Definitely
Where
like
it's like this, it is so ingrained into like the culture, I guess, right? Where it's just like it's become this thing.
I mean, what Red Hot Riding Hood is the Citizen Kane of the cartoon canon. It's a foundational text in cartoons.
It absolutely is, yeah. So yeah, easy pick. Red Hat Riding Hood, best movie of 1943.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Thanks again to Ambriehl for joining. And thanks for recommending Cabin in the Sky. It didn't win out over it didn't win out over Red Hot Riding Hood, but I still had a good time with it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and good conversation.
It's always nice to have someone that has done actual research on something.
I'm not always like this, I promise. It was easy for like 2 films and a short, so
Either way, I appreciate having you on. I appreciate your perspective. And so you don't have to research so much for the next one because God knows we don't.
honestly though, it just like naturally comes to me. I'm always like, wait, how did that happen? What was that like? Blah blah blah. Because again, just a huge history nerd.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me. This was wonderful. Yeah, y'all are doing great work. Keep it up, and looking forward to future episodes.
Thanks. Did you have anything that you wanted to talk about that's going on?
Any plugs?
Not really. I mean, if anybody wants to send me money, I'll always take that. But I don't have anything else. Yeah, my life
Send
is
Ambriehl
boring.
money.
So, yes,
Yeah.
that is the takeaway. Yeah, happy Black History Month, actually.
Oh yeah, that right.
Yeah, Cabin in the Sky, Black History Month. Woohoo! So yeah, that's all I have. But thanks again, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and let us know when you want to come back. Appreciate
For
it.
sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, definitely.
And yeah, that's about it. Follow us on the socials and all that, and subscribe and all that, and that'll do it. On to 1944. Glenn, I'll see you next year.
See you next year.
This, my creation, can never perish unless its energies are drained off artificially by changing the poles from plus to minus.